Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I'm glad that you guys can join me this morning. I hope you guys are doing okay. I ran into a mic issue. This mic sometimes loses connectivity with the computer. I'm not quite sure why. I don't know if it's a faulty wire or what, but it took me a while to figure out how to get this thing back on. But I'm glad that you guys can join me, and I hope you guys are doing all right this morning. A lot of news. A lot of news. I will say, if you guys dig this content, you find yourself coming back here often, don't forget to hit the like button. I will try to start saying that or start adding something into each individual episode, as I say once in the beginning and once at the end. And it's not necessarily conducive to the individual videos that are effectively cut. But I will find some kind of technological solution to doing so. That's it. I hope you guys are doing well. If you're under the sound of this voice, and I would imagine if you're hearing this voice, you would have to be under the sound of this voice. You have my appreciation for being so wherever you are in the world, whether you're in the United States or whether you are floating somewhere abroad. You have my appreciation for being here. A lot of news. There is or was a coup attempt in Benin. Now, I had to look up where Benin was, world traveler. That doesn't necessarily know where this is. But just to give you some context on where this is, right here. This is Benin. And obviously, it's beside Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, Mali, Niger. Now, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso were the Sahel states that broke away with their own coups and established, I would say, sovereign states. And they are now part of the Sahel states that are independent. So Benin, being on the border of both Niger and Burkina Faso, this is also, you'd imagine, part of West Africa. Now, because of this, it seems that this coup attempt has been put down. Now, whether it's been put down in its fullest or not, there are airstrikes and everything else that are apparently still taking place, or at the very least were taking place. But France, ECOWAS got involved. They both got involved. Now, this is fascinating on a few points. In one sense, you have another government in West Africa that effectively fell, or at the very least was trying to overthrow the government. The government seemed to be resilient enough to effectively push back on the coup attempt, in which case the coup attempt failed. ECOWAS and France got further involved. Now, what's wild about this is, again, as I keep pointing out, it is a wild thing for an African country to be motivated by a white guy sitting in France with little to no approval rating. And yet, it still is the case. France apparently still has some level of influence in these areas. And you can imagine ECOWAS at one point threatened to attack the Sahel states, but effectively backed off of doing so. Well, in Benin's case, they seem to have taken a red line, or at the very least is trying to draw a red line under the idea of these governments falling. It's fascinating. David Houdain was supposed to be on the show today. There was a mistake, a time zone mistake, that I will take as my fault, because I think it is my fault. I should have been more specific in regards to the time frame. But I asked him to come on tomorrow. Tomorrow, in his case, meant Tuesday, not necessarily Monday. And so he's not going to be on today. He is going to be on tomorrow. But he is the person to give a breakdown of this. He was very active on social media talking about this. And so he will be the person to give a better understanding and context to what has been taking place in this regard. Nevertheless, it is fascinating. Look, he did make the point on the show that democracy in Africa is somewhat of a fig leaf for external control, and that there is let's say, a strain of these nations that want sovereignty and don't believe that they can get it under the model to which it currently exists, meaning the model of quote unquote democracy that currently exists. And that there requires a nationalistic authoritarianism in order to put these countries onto a footing of economic, military sovereignty that can lead to an actual democratic order that is an actual democratic order that is sovereign. I'm trying to choose my words precisely on this. He will be the person to give this breakdown. And so I'm not going to go further into this. I'm going to let him be the one to explain this. The other big news that came out is a national security plan or national security strategy from the Trump administration. Now, this has been getting a huge amount of press from all quarters of alt media and regular media because it comes across in many of these sectors as a sharp departure from, let's say, the Wolfowitz doctrine of the United States being a superpower, the primary power across the globe, and this assertive directive of asserting that American power in all corners of the globe, full spectrum dominance. Whereas the Trump doctrine, if you want to call it that, looks more like an America that recognizes limits. And in the context of those limits, tries to mitigate those limits by effectively using other countries as its tools and proxies in its exertion of power across the globe. Now, if you look at many sectors of alt media or even many sectors of mainstream media, the way they talk about this is the United States is re-entrenching, that the U.S. is pulling back from the world. Yeah, it's different than what they are trying to describe it as, at least from my point of view, and my reading of this. What it comes across as is the United States recognizes that it is overextended, financially busted, and is trying to find ways to effectively have empire on the cheap. And this will be like the Romans saying, okay, we're going to add in the Gauls, we're going to add in the barbarians, we're going to add in all of these people into that military because we ourselves as Romans can't necessarily do it all on our own. That's what it comes across as. So it's like, okay, it shows immense contempt for Europe. That is clear. And the reading of that one by by media and everything else is correct. They effectively say there's an erasure of Europe, that Europe has brought in so many immigrants that it is unclear whether or not the European foreign policy will be aligned with the United States. And as such, it is a national security risk for the United States, for Europe, to be destroying itself with immigration. It's very clear on that front. And even goes into the point of effectively saying they want to have independent or the very least sovereign European states. Now, this is obviously purely out of self-interest. The United States wants to be able to sell its products into the European Union, substandard products. If you've been to Europe, look, I will tell you, when I go to Europe, I lose weight. Part of that is because Europe doesn't have the crap and junk in its food in the way that the United States has in its food. There are all sorts of things that they allow in the United States that are questionable in regards to issues of health. Some of which are even cancer causing, that is just not allowed in Europe. So certain, agricultural products, for example, just aren't allowed. Their food seems to be safer and healthier. Now, the United States hates that and wants to be able to effectively infect the European market with the crap that they allow to Americans. They don't give a shit about us. And they're like, hey, why does Europe care that much about its own people in regards to its health? And so if you have independent states, and those independent states are making choices in regards to what they allow into their countries, well, it's easier to pick those countries apart. Now, whether Europe allows this or not, who knows? And the very point that you're saying you want Europe to be more sovereign is a bit wild, considering the entire point of NATO was for it to be less sovereign. I mean, the entire point of NATO is to have control, for the United States to be able to exert control over Europe's military matters and military affairs. And so the idea of we want Europe to be sovereign, be careful what you wish for. That means you would have less influence. And right now, the Trump administration is complaining that the Europeans are trying to put the kibosh on any kind of deal that the United States is effectively trying to make with Ukraine. So Trump doesn't necessarily just want to walk. Trump wants to get Ukraine to be on board as opposed to forcing them to be on board. And the Europeans are doing any and everything in their power to effectively say, don't take the deal. Don't take the deal. We don't want you to accept anything that the United States is effectively putting out. So, okay, well, I mean, sovereignty, if indeed that's indeed what you're looking for, has consequences. This will be one of them. Okay, good. So we do have 9 o'clock. Give me 1 second. I want to respond to Karen on this. Okay, excellent. I ran into a scheduling issue because David wasn't necessarily able to join at 9 this morning. There was a hole at the 9 o'clock hour. I sent off several requests, one of which was to Karen Kiwatowski. Nailed it. I didn't get a response from her. And I think I've told you once before, I get very paranoid. I assumed I'm disliked. And so when I don't get a request or response from somebody, I assume that they don't necessarily want to join. But she either I didn't get her text or she didn't get my text, but she will be joining. Mark Sleboda will also be here at 7:15. What time is it? Mark should be here now, actually. Let me make sure I sent him the link. Yes, I did send him the link. Okay. So Mark should be here shortly. Yeah, Mark should be here shortly. We're also going to have Carl Jha. He is going to be here talking also about the national security strategy in relation to China. For China's part, well, 2 things. Also, for Russia part, so contempt for Europe. On the Russian side, the United States is effectively saying that they want to make, let's say, stabilize relations with Russia and have a cessation of hostilities in Ukraine. Well, cessation of hostilities is not the same thing as ending the overarching reason and rationale for the war. Those are different things. And if indeed what you want is a Europe to be able to defend itself, effectively you want a Europe to be able to be a stand-in for America in the context of, obviously, Russia. And even when you're looking at places like Japan, South Korea, Philippines, etc., you're looking for countries to take the role of the United States in that particular region, with the United States either directing or pushing or influencing their behavior towards countries that you don't particularly like. One of the other things that also needs to be discussed is this idea of China basically turning China into a peer competitor, or I think they call it a near-peer competitor. Now, the biggest question mark on this document is, will this survive? And how much of this is reality? Now, obviously, part of the document talks about Monroe 2.0, this idea of the United States retrenchment and sphere of influence. Now, this is a bit rich, considering that when Russia tried to exert its quote-unquote sphere of influence, I mean, NATO moved all the way to the border of Russia. Now, the document does talk about this idea of stopping the expansion of NATO, effectively saying this ever expansion needs to quit. It needs to stop. It's destabilizing Europe. But it's a bit rich that when Russia complains about NATO overthrowing a country, or let's say the U.S. overthrowing Ukraine, and trying to expand to the border of Russia in the context of Ukraine, a country that has been a pivot point into Russia or the Soviet Union for multiple wars, to the death of 20, 30 million Russians, that there was hysteria and outrage. Whereas the US is like, this is Monroe Doctrine 2.0. We are not allowing foreign actors to, let's say, influence or instigate themselves into the affairs of countries in our region. Hence, we're going after Venezuela in part because Russia, China, and Iran have a close relationship with Venezuela. So this is a bit rich, right? Also, the idea that the United States should have some kind of influence on the countries in South America is also a bit rich. The US is effectively affirming or asserting control over the entirety of the Western Hemisphere, which is a bit amazing. Now, whereas this may be, let's say, good news for other countries around the world, this is obviously tragic news for the countries of South America that rightfully see themselves as sovereign and independent nations that have the ability to conduct their foreign policy and domestic policy in the way that they want. So again, it's a bit rich that this is the claim that is effectively made in this document. The other part to this is how much of this is legit. Meaning, just because the Trump administration or elements of the Trump administration wants this, doesn't necessarily mean that Congress is okay with this. The blob is okay with this. Europe is obviously not okay with this. Like, meaning, you may have elements of the Trump administration that wants to be able to assert a document like this, but it's secondary to the point of how much this sticks from outside of this administration. When this administration effectively leaves, what will the next administration do, and will the next administration take this onus on, especially if J.D. Vance is necessarily not president in, I don't know, whenever Trump drops dead, or for that matter, when the next administration comes into office. Will a Democratic administration assert the exact same policy? Probably not. Will they go back to something more akin to Wolfowitz? Probably so. And even beyond that point, how much of this is real in the context of the Trump administration? I mean, for all of this talk about wanting to wind down the Ukraine war, can the administration accept Russian terms? Up to this point, it doesn't seem like they can. So we will see. We will see. I am somewhat skeptical, however, on how, let's say, the stick-to-itiveness of this. I don't doubt the contempt for Europe. That contempt seems to be pretty real. Everything that comes out of Trump administration's mouth in regards to Europe seems to make that contempt plain and clear. But we'll see. I think people are overblowing this. I think they are ignoring elements of this document that are seemingly, while accepting limits of American power that weren't necessarily acknowledged or accepted, let's say, in previous administrations. It seems to try to mitigate those limits by effectively using other countries as its tools and proxies in doing so. So we'll see. One of the other interesting tidbits of news that came out had to do with, one second. One of the other tidbits of news that came out had to do with the strike that took place, the quote-unquote infamous double tap. Now, again, the double tap thing blows my mind, and I know I keep saying this, and maybe I shouldn't keep banging this drum, but I think the drum needs to be banged. We are taking issue with a double tap as opposed to the fact that these strikes were taking place at all. Meaning Donald Trump right now, the Gerald Ford is steaming towards Venezuela. Donald Trump is putting all sorts of pressure and trying to overthrow a government over bogus reasons. The reasons are understood to be bogus. On top of the overthrow of the government, which is outrageous in and of itself, you have murders, mass murder in the Caribbean. Call it what it is. But what people are focusing on is that Hegseth Bradley Trump murdered people who were hanging off the side of a boat that they already bombed, as if they just bombed the boat and murdered everybody on the boat, that would have been okay. What has been released and what they've effectively pointed out is that the people were on the side of the boat hanging for over 40 minutes, meaning you hit the boat. There were two people hanging off the side of the boat that apparently was split in half, destroyed. And as they were hanging off the side of a boat for 40 minutes, they were waving, asking for help. Now, the argument up to this point had been, which was ludicrous in and of itself, was that, well, they were trying to grab cocaine and potentially radio for help from other narco terrorists to apparently get into their boats and come to the area that had already been destroyed by the U.S. military, as if they were going to put themselves in jeopardy, knowing that the U.S. military had just destroyed one of the boats. Okay. That's what we're supposed to believe. These men are hanging off the boats for their lives, and yet have presence of mind to say, oh, where's the coke? Where's the cocaine? All right, so this is nonsense on his face. To make this even worse, what we found out was that this boat wasn't even headed towards America. The boat was not even headed towards America. That's amazing. You hit a boat. There are people who are living, who are clinging to the sides of a destroyed boat. They're waving for help, meaning they're waving to try to get assistance and help. And we turn around in order to murder them outright in cold-blooded murder. All of this is cold-blooded murder. But it's even more so when you basically have desperate people hanging off the side of a boat, clinging for their lives, waving to try to get your attention, to help them. And you'd wait for 40 minutes and then murder them in cold blood. And then the lie that you add is, well, they could have called for help. They were trying to get the cocaine. Trying to get cocaine to do what? The boat is destroyed. Well, they were trying to, turn the boat back over. Really? Is that what they were trying to do? I mean, you could actually watch what was taking place. And what was taking place seems to be different than what we are hearing about now in regards to what was occurring. It makes it that much more egregious. It just makes it that much more egregious. And so, will there be consequences for this? Oh, that is the question. That is the question. Up to this point, this seems to be normal U.S. behavior. I know a lot of Democrats are screaming about this, but those same Democrats weren't screaming about this when Obama had to kill this. And he was going through murdering people, the majority of which were civilians, because those drone strikes were killing largely and predominantly civilians. And so I get that there is complaints about this. And maybe the difference is, well, in drone strikes, you hear about the drone strikes, but you didn't see the drone strikes. It's kind of like that football player that punched his girlfriend. When you heard about it, it's like, oh, that sounds horrible. That sounds bad. That's not bad at all. I mean, that sounds horrible. And yet he was going to keep his job. And then when you finally saw the video where he effectively knocked her unconscious in an elevator, that was different. It was just different. It's like seeing it adds a level of reality to it that's different than seeing it adds a level of reality to it that's just different than just hearing about it or just reading about it. It's like reading about it is flat. Seeing it, it's just a whole different reality. And so maybe that's the difference. But in the context of that difference, will there be consequences? I'm hard-pressed to believe there will be. There are people who are saying Hegseth needs to go. There are people who are saying Hegseth needs to go. In fact, they're saying Hegseth needs to lose his job. He needs to be thrown overboard. And he needs to be thrown overboard in order to, let's say, for there to be consequences meted out in some context. Well, Hegseth has been doing everything in his power to effectively say, hey, this is not on me. This is on the military commander that made the choice, Admiral Bradley. to fire that strike. And I never told him to do that. But I stand by him, even though I never told him to do that. Is that going to work? Who knows? If you fire Hegseth, you make it clear that something bad has taken place and that Hegseth needs to be fired for it. If you don't fire Hegseth, this festers. And again, I'm blown away by the fact that this is the thing that's festering. Not the fact that you have been murdering people, but more so to the point that you double tapped. I just find it to be completely amazing. But that seems to be where we are. It's just mind-blowing, to put it mildly. It is dark in Kiev. It is dark in Kiev. Russia has been doing military strikes against trains. And I love my guest, man. What is his name? Dances with Bears. John Helmer. John Helmer pointed out, when I asked him, does Russia have to take all of Ukraine? And John Helmer said, well, no. They can destroy the capability of hardware coming into Ukraine by destroying the railways. And what do you know? That's what Russia has been doing. They've been going after railways. There's video of a steam train that Ukraine has been effectively using because Russia's been destroying the other capabilities of railways and decapitating the capability of Poland to continue to send weapons systems into Ukraine. That also seems to be something that has been taking place. But this is Kiev. In darkness. Apparently, there are a few lights, but those are rare occurrences. That is amazing. That is amazing. Obviously, the war is not going well for Ukraine. Volchansk, Pokrovsk, Leningrad is surrounded. The noose on Leningrad apparently is tightening, meaning the situation for them is getting worse in that sense. Desertions have increased, believe it or not. And the number of desertions, hundreds of thousands at this point? This is not a recipe for success. The money that Europe wants to get their hands on, Belgium is not budging on this. France apparently does not want to steal the money that is in their banks. Apparently there's several billions of dollars in their banks that France doesn't necessarily want to take for themselves because they don't want to deal with the risk. And so for all of this talk about stealing Russian money in order to plug the budget holes of Ukraine, up to this point, that doesn't seem to be the case. Meaning it doesn't seem to be a situation where they're able to get their hands on that money. Now, they're coming up with all sorts of schemes and all sorts of plans, but up to this point, Belgium, Euroclear, even if I'm not mistaken, the IMF, and I could be wrong on the IMF, all of which has said no. All of which has said no. Oh, my guest is here. Excellent. We are joined with the one, the only Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. How you doing, Mark? You doing okay?
Other than some unforeseen and unexplainable technical problems, I'm alive. How the fuck are you?
I am doing fine. And I the other day, my computer went through a reset just before I started the show, and I literally had to go to the whole other computer in order to get it to work. So I feel your pain on that one. I'm glad you could join me. You guys can find Mark on Boosty, Boosty. All of his interviews end up on Boosty. He is fantastic in regards to his analysis of situations dealing with Ukraine, Russia, etc. Mark, let's start with just a military assessment before getting to the national security strategy, because I do want to get your take on that. Contempt for Europe. I think I've called it Contempt for Europe, Retrenchment, competition with China, and I guess a diversification of responsibility in regards to various places. But before we get to that, Pokrovsk has fallen, Leningrad is surrounded. The noose around Leningrad seems to be tightening. Volchansk has fallen. There's mopping up operations taking place in Kupiansk. What is going on the battlefield? Give us a breakdown.
Okay, so there's two. Everything you've said so far is absolutely correct. Pokrovsk has been under control for several weeks already. Whatever the Kiev regime may ridiculously claim as videos and geolocations clearly show us. In Kupiansk, the situation is a little bit more complicated. Russia completely took control of the city, except for some holdout forces within the city. And Russia announced that actually before Pokrovsk. But they completely surrounded the city, and there were some isolated forces. But in the last couple of days, the Kiev regime has just dug the bottom of the barrel, thrown in, freshly nabbed off the street conscripts, whatever they had left, and they are launching major counterattacks in Kupiansk area that are serious. They do threaten not to retake Kupiansk, but there is a possibility they're trying to break open the cauldron at one point to let those forces that are trapped within the city escape. I myself do not think they're going to be successful, but it's important to know what is really going on the battlefield as far as I'm concerned all the time. And because there is an ebb and a tide, it is still a conflict. There is a steamroller, but even a steamroller can face, things it can't pass temporarily and slowdowns. And the Kiev regime is simply throwing everything it has left at Kupiansk. At the same time, Russia is also gathering forces for 2, possibly 3 new offensives, right? Almost certainly not all of them will be enacted, right? It depends on how the Kiev regime responds, where they send troops, where Russia sees the opportunities. But Russia is gathering forces for another major thrust in the northern Kharkov area, particularly the northeast Kharkov area. They're gathering forces to launch a assault at Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, specifically a new offensive force that will be dedicated to that. And there continues to be a Russian buildup in the north, in the very northwest of the contact line, in the Russian side, just opposite of Chernigov, which has not seen much conflict, certainly not since 2022. So that could be an attempt by Russia to force the Kiev regime to hold troops there so that they can't put them elsewhere, or to rush troops there. But if the Kiev regime doesn't respond, then it could very well turn into a real new offensive from that area. That's the way Russia is keeping the dynamics up. But I would say the new developments, I mean, the really fastest developments over the last few days have still been in the Zaporozhye region, where Russia just continues to take settlement after settlement. I don't even have times to learn the names of them all, much less people who are less familiar with Ukraine or Russia at this point. And the major settlement in the area, Russia has moved into Gulai Polya in the eastern Zaporozhye region much faster than was expected. They've already taken some 20% of the city, and they are still continuing wide flanking, the pinchers around the city to cut off the supply lines into it. And my understanding is that those have been very successful. That the Kiev regime forces in Gulai Polya are almost effectively in a cauldron at this point as well. And the Russian military forces in the area are demanding their surrender. They're leafleting them with their options and so forth. But they seem pretty confident that they've got those forces there in the bag. So at the same time, there were enormous Russian long-range strikes for 3 nights in a row. We've seen Russia doesn't put out, of course, the exact numbers of the drones and missiles that it uses in these strikes. We have to take that from the Kiev regime. They never have, right? But one of the attacks was in excess of 700 drones and missiles, according to the Kiev regime, and another of the attacks was in excess of 1,000 drones and missiles. And Russia's targeting their electrical infrastructure, their military industrial, also their train transport logistics in a major way that they haven't before, further west. And in particular, that the photos are out. The Kiev regime always tries to hide all of this damage as much as possible. They always try, there are laws out preventing it, but in particular, the Fastov railway station, an important junction outside of Kiev, was really hit hard. And normally, attacks on railroads can be repaired fairly quickly. That is why Russia has not gone after the railways on a national scale in this conflict, because it simply wasn't cost effective to do so. Both Russia and Ukraine, have the Soviet legacy. They are able to rebuild train infrastructure, right? Tracks, whatever's damaged very quickly. But the Kiev regime is now not as able to repair things as effectively as they have. And because most of the trains are run on electricity, that is doubling the problems, because now they're having the physical problems of destruction and the fact that they're not getting the electricity they need to run the trains. They've actually begun running old early Soviet era steam locomotives again, where they're able to get them operating, because they don't have the electricity to run the trains everywhere now. So Russia, with the Garans now being produced, probably at this point in excess of 1,000 a day, they have new opportunities to what they can do, and they can go after the railway infrastructure in a way that simply wasn't cost effective for the Kiev regime's repairability, like it is now. New opportunities are opening. So that's why I believe we're seeing the strikes like this that we haven't before. And another new development that has been reported on shall we say the outside, or not the center narrative of the Western media, is the new capabilities, the always continuing evolution of Russian combat systems. One of them is with the Garan drones, which have various iterations now. The Garan 2, the Garan 3 in a jet capability. Now the Garan, that's the steam locomotive. The Garan is now it's been able for a couple months now to hit moving targets, right? So meaning it's controlled in real time. The Kiev regime has been using the F-16s and the Mirage 2000s that it got in a solely air defense capacity, right? Hiding them in West Ukraine and using them to hunt down drones and potentially cruise missiles when they attack. They're not hugely successful, but any success is better than none, is the argument. But now the Garans are turning the table on these aircraft and going after them in fighter mode. Two different capacities. One, they can now, particularly with the Garan 3 with the jets, they can go kamikaze after the aircraft. Another capability is there now evidence, and the Kiev regime has admitted this, that Russia is equipping the Garans with air-to-air missiles. So they're effectively now small fighters as well, drone fighters, and they can go after the aircraft. So these are all new continuing evolution of Russia's weapon systems, making them far more dangerous. And again, they have different iterations. It's not like every Garan is capable of this, of different things. They're tailoring them now for specific capabilities and missions. And there's a very wide variety of what they're capable of at this moment. And there's just nothing equivalent on the other side. Why? Because NATO doesn't have anything equivalent in any type of serious production numbers to equip the Kiev regime with. So I always important to, I think, to keep up with the technological evolution on the battlefield. For one, because on both sides, even on the Kiev regime side, they're light years ahead of NATO in drone warfare, and that's modern warfare. I mean, that's the situation. We also, of course, through the end of last week, we saw these new, well, not entirely new, but renewed Kiev regime attacks on civilian tankers and on civilian infrastructure in the Black Sea, including the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, which Kazakhstan and the US are heavily invested in. There was one more attack in the last week on a tanker in the Black Sea, not transporting oil, but transporting sunflower oil. Again, this was off the Turkish coast in the Turkish exclusive economic zone. This was a Russian ship, and I believe it was the MiG Volga 2. I think that was the name. It was not hit by a surface drone. It was actually hit by UAVs, by air drones, air kamikaze drones. And it suffered some surface damage in 2 attacks, evidently. But neither one was enough to sink it, or it was able to get to port in Turkey, I believe, and will get whatever repairs it needs there. But we haven't seen another attack in, I want to say, 6 days now since then. Another such. Turkey was extremely upset about this, and I mean, there's already problems. The Financial Times reported this morning that insurance costs for all shipping of any countries in the Black Sea is up by 3 times now because of the new danger, the new potential danger. And Putin was quite clear. He says, we have options here. He says, one, we could choose the option that we could go quid pro quo after the shipping in the Black Sea of any country that is helping Ukraine, of any country doing trade with Ukraine. He says, we haven't done that. We've chosen not to do that. We could do that. Is that where you want to go down the path here? And he was clearly speaking not just to the Kiev regime there, but to the Europeans and potentially the Americans. I think personally, the British are the ones driving this whole thing on the Black Sea, and they always have before. Their Admiral Radican has bragged on the pages of the British newspapers how he's in charge of Ukraine's winning strategy on the Black Sea, blah, blah, blah. So I can't imagine that has changed. So I would believe the British are ultimately behind all of this to a significant degree. Putin also said the other option is we can simply stop the Kiev regime's access to the sea, right? And we are willing to do that. And there's 2 different ways that could be done. One is short range, right? And one a long range. And you can really be done without putting Russian naval forces even at increased threat of surface drone attacks. One is to flood the port of Odessa with sea mines. Very easily done. Russia hasn't done it so far in this conflict. I have to wonder why, to be perfectly honest. I guess diplomatic reasons is one of them. but they're certainly easily capable of that, and that would present, of course, a huge problem for the West, because it has been using shipping in the Black Sea to get the majority of its weapons and ammunition, because it's always far more efficient to transport large amounts of military equipment and ammunition and everything by sea than it is by train. From Europe on land. The other option, the long range option, is they seem to be giving Russia the perfect excuse for going after Odessa, taking Odessa permanently. Again, that's not an immediate possibility, but I mean, how can you say that Russia should, the arguments for taking Odessa just become more and more on the Russian side, and arguments against going to that extent, keep slipping by the wayside. So there is a renewed conflict in the Black Sea as well. But as always, it's a sideshow. Ultimately, the conflict is decided on the ground, right? And even the long range strikes are significant, but long range strikes after 3 years have not just completely destroyed the Kiev regime. They've certainly inhibited it. And likewise, the Kiev regime's, vaunted attacks on Russia's oil refineries have barely dented Russia's oil economy, despite claims to the otherwise. Reuters reported a couple weeks ago that Russia's refining production overall is only down 3% on a year. And as well, there was actually a report in the Moscow Times, which is not a Russian newspaper. It's a Dutch info warfare outlet. It had an office in Moscow years ago, but of course, all of that has been ended, since the beginning of the conflict. But the Moscow Times actually did a report. They did a survey, a very extensive survey, and their conclusions from this is all of this talk about a Russian gasoline crisis resulting from their attacks on the Kiev regime's, Western-assisted attacks on Russia's oil refineries caused some massive gasoline crisis where Russians were waiting in line for gasoline and there was a shortage and they were having to import from outside the country. All of it was 90% false and exaggeration. And what the real conclusion they came to is something that I and others suggested was, the majority of what was going on is all of this occurred. Most of these incidences that were reported, and they tried to present it as if it was nationwide. It wasn't. It was in the Russian south, right? It was in Crimea and on the Sochi coast, right? On the Black Sea, in Russia's subtropical climate, where Russians go on vacation every August. And this happened in August. And Russians hit the road, right? They're like Americans, on vacation season. Large numbers of them go on vacation, generally not always true anymore, but generally a more cost-effective way than taking on, an airline somewhere, domestic vacations. There's always a run on gasoline because there's so many people traveling by road and filling up their tanks in doing so. And that is actually, it turns out, even according to the survey, the majority of what that was. And, what it wasn't, it was like small, mostly independent gas stations, really small ones, might have had a little bit difficulty, particularly in that season with distribution, on top of it. And some of those stations didn't have a supply of gasoline that was constant. And then the thing was, even if one of those smaller stations, there was almost no recorded incidences that they talked to people that they weren't able to simply go to another gas station and get gas. So there's all of that was noise. It was all propaganda and disinformation and exaggeration as a result of opium, right? Because that's what they want those attacks, the effect they wanted them to have. But none of it was real. And now you don't have to take my word for it living in Moscow. You can take the Dutch-based, quote-unquote, Moscow Times, which has been forced to admit it didn't really happen. like so much of this other noise in the war, about things that have happened and have turned out not to be true.
Let's go to the national security assessment in the time remaining. Contempt for Europe, that seems to be very clear. The assessment even points out that there's
more negative said about Europe in this document than there is about either Russia or China. I mean, that cannot be avoided. They domestically politically attack. Yes. He goes after the migration policy as a civilization erasing, which, to be frank, I think their immigration policy is broken, but then again, so is the US's, right? And there's that, right? But this is political. Let's be clear. Trump comes from a almost in the modern day, at least, a new populist right or populist conservative, if you want, a political persuasion. And there are, parallels in Europe, and you can easily point to Orban in Hungary, recent, parties that were banned in Romania, candidates that were banned in Romania and elsewhere. And Trump is going after the technocratic Brussels European elite for the suppression of this conservative populist politics in Europe. And almost certainly a lot of it is personal, right? In two different elections now, two different administrations, right? Trump has seen the European political elite openly support, you could argue, interfere in U.S. elections in support of Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris against him, right? I mean, there's no question. The Western media has acknowledged all of this, right? They openly said it. Starmer had people campaigning for Kamala Harris in the last election, which was just an amazing stupidity. Anyway, and Trump has just expressed his hatred and contempt for the European political elite enshrined in a U.S. major grand vision geopolitical strategy document. There's nothing like this has happened before. And this is an attempt. I don't believe any of this is going to be successful, right? And it's a theoretical, right? It's a vision document. This isn't policy itself, right? It will. The question will be, how much does this actually affect policy, right? And we'll get to that. But he signals out the greatest threat to democracy in the world being the European political elites, which, I mean, he kind of has a point. I mean, I'm not entirely disagree with it. I think maybe exaggerated a bit, but there certainly is that. They should not be able to claim any just moral justification for their actions in the world or on the basis of their systemic or moral superiority because of their democratic system. That's just nonsense, right? It's hypocrisy of the highest degree at this point. So Trump has gone to war. I mean, revenge is a dish best served cold, and this is Trump's revenge, right? He has contempt for the European political elite, and he openly announced U.S. support for these populist, conservative forces in Europe in future elections. It's just amazing. But there's a lot more to it than that, right? He elevated as the top U.S. national security its own problems with borders, right? And the national security, you want to call it drug smuggling and everything else. And then the second priority would probably be the Western Hemisphere. And he has declared literally, in those words, a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, where even as later in the document, he goes on how the U.S. sought global domination under previous administrations, right? Hegemony, right? As we've talked about many times. And that was, wrong and it was wasteful and ineffective. but he doubles down on domination for the Western Hemisphere.
Right.
In this,
Right.
and goes far further, right? Referencing the Monroe Doctrine in this. This is the Trump trademark version of the Monroe Doctrine, which goes much further. He seems to suggest that countries in the Western Hemisphere should not even have trade relations with what the document addresses as the U.S.'s economic competitors, China and Russia, and you can't imagine that countries like Brazil, which is a significant power in the Western Hemisphere, a member of BRICS, is going to be happy having to raise their hand and ask for a hall pass to use the lavatory in geopolitical terms, right? They're just not going to accept this.
Remember BRICS.
BRICS.
Literally, BRICS.
According to Trump, BRICS is dead and everyone's left and it doesn't exist anymore. But I said this weekend on another on RT, there's two big undeclared enemies in this, because Russia is not identified as an enemy, as an adversary, as anything. That is simply a country that Russia needs to restore strategic stability with. And the biggest obstacle that is those Europeans, right? I mean, that's said straight out. China has kind of been lowered on the priority list. It's still identified as a major competitor, and he wants to keep the status quo with Taiwan. But he also hints that U.S. allies in the Pacific, i.e. Japan and the Philippines, need to do more of the same burden sharing, and they need to step up as the proxies against China in the Pacific, which, to be fair, that's exactly what those governments are now doing. Yes. I mean, they just want to be the next Ukraine, I guess. But so the U.S. kind of steps back in a position and pushes in the Pacific and pushes its proxies forward to the front. That's what's going on there. But there's two big unidentified, unnamed enemies to Trump's grand strategic vision here. And when I say Trump, the real author of this is Elbridge Colby, the Undersecretary of Defense for Strategic Planning. And I did a video on him months ago that really identified where all of this was going to go, I think pretty well, because he was already working on some lesser strategic papers to that effect several months ago. So this was all entirely predictable that it was likely coming out the chute. So the first one is BRICS, right? Because it's not just that he can deal with other great powers anymore on a one-on-one basis. They ally and coordinate together, right? How can he dominate Brazil, in the way he foresees in the Western Hemisphere when it's part of the BRICS, when it's allied with Russia and China and India and South Africa and other countries now under BRICS Plus to a significant degree. Trump, of course, they just like to pretend that BRICS doesn't exist. And I mean, it doesn't exist to the extent that some people would like it to. It doesn't, right? It's not a military alliance or anything. But there is a multipolar vision there. It is forming nascent institutions of global governance parallel to and separate from the United States. And that should not be completely discounted. The other big one, the biggest elephant in the room, is the biggest enemy of this, which is the U.S. government. Because the number of people that agree with this strategy of this grand strategic vision, reorientation, is Trump, Vance, presumably Witkoff, maybe Dan Driscoll, and Elbridge Colby, right? That's about it. It's hard to identify other significance. Yeah. So let's see. Both major political parties, the Democrats and Republicans, the vast majority of them are against this. The bipartisan foreign policy consensus in Congress is just completely against this. The deep state, the blob, the permanent bureaucracy, whatever you want to call it, right? The State Department, the intelligence services, the Pentagon, the military industrial complex, the think tanks, everyone is against this. right? The media, of course, calling it a betrayal of Europe and trying to cast Russia as a friend and Europe as the villain, right? All over the place. There's absolutely no hope of any of this really happening because it will be blocked, if not by Europe, and starting a war with Russia in Ukraine directly, which is certainly something they seem to be heading towards. But
Yes.
the U.S. government will sabotage and overrule this at every possibility. They do not agree with this reinterpretation of U.S. hegemony, right? This retrenchment, this Fortress America in the Western Hemisphere, still seeking to exert dominance, but from a remove, from afar, through proxies only, right? That's Trump's vision, and it's a radical reorientation, but it's very unlikely to happen. The only possibility of this being cemented is if Vance follows Trump, and then maybe even he would need 2 terms. Only then would this really start to gel. And the Europeans are absolutely horrified, of course. They're just apoplectic over all of this. They have no, they're going to have a meeting today on how to react to it, because that's all they're capable of doing is having meeting after meeting, right? They're just going to roll over and play dead and try to ignore it, and just they've got a clock in their rooms. I'm sure that Starmer and Merz and Macron all have a timer in their bedrooms on the countdown till Trump's term is over, right? They just want to run out the clock, right? And they will. They're, according to Bloomberg, they're actively telling Ukraine at this point, agree nothing on the peace process with the U.S., right? Just, hold out in Donbass, hold out everywhere, just hold out. In 2030, we'll be ready for war with Russia. So just hang on till then, right? That's literally what they're saying to Ukraine right now. I still don't have any hope for the peace process, and I don't. Again, some people are trying to paint this as a good thing, right? It's not a good thing. It's a different thing. It's a different flavor of a still hegemonic beast, right? More focused on some things, less focused on other things. It's better for Russia in theory, right? In policy and practice, we'll see how much of it enacts, right? And maybe less pressure on China. You could possibly see it going that way. But if you're in the Western Hemisphere, you're now a Trump subject, evidently, right? So
yeah,
it's not a good thing. It is a different thing. It is a hegemonic retrenchment, right? That's the vision. But it's very unlikely. The U.S. deep state, right? The blob, they're going to stonewall and sabotage and block this being implemented in policy for the next 3.5 years. Remember Trump in his first administration trying to pull troops out of Syria and yes. Afghanistan? Yeah, that didn't happen. This is also unlikely to happen. They're now demanding, seemingly completely in line with this, that Europe be self-sufficient on defense by 2027, right?
Yes.
Which is also unlikely to happen from either a European side or America withdrawing troops from Europe, but it certainly scares them, right? And again, that's part of the division of labor, the burden sharing of Western hegemony. But the whole argument from Western hegemony largely goes, US-led Western hegemony largely goes out, with the bathwater with this, because they're picturing the entire current European political elite as enemies of the Trump administration, which,
right.
to be fair, certainly in this, they are. So, that whole division and burden sharing thing appears to be, even that. If this was enacted, it wouldn't work out.
Be careful what you ask for. Like, the entire point of NATO was for the United States to be able to control and guide European foreign policy.
Yeah. U.S. in Europe, Germany down, and Russia out. That was the whole original purpose of NATO, and still is to a large extent. But yeah, NATO is not mentioned in this document. Ideology, human rights, democracy promotion, the whole democratic states versus authoritarian states. That's all on the cutting room floor. That's not U.S. policy anymore, according to this U.S. national security strategy. That's all fascinating. The implications of this is huge. As an international relations theory specialist, this is all extremely interesting and exciting to me, even if I don't think it's actually possible to implement in policy realistically for the Trump administration. Just imagining the alt history fan fiction reality where this actually becomes U.S. foreign policy. I mean, that's interesting to envisage that world, even if I don't believe it's actually going to happen.
Yeah. What would that mean for Europe in that alt fiction world? I mean, because this is effectively a new security architecture of Europe.
They're talking about the death of Europe. Europe is in civilizational decline. It's not able to innovate. It's economically moribund and collapsing. Even it's not able to defend itself either, militarily, even in will to power. Yes, a strategic liability. That is a good summation. I saw Simplicius the Thinker use exactly that expression, and yeah, it sums it. I mean, that takes all the contempt out of it, right? I mean, that's a very technical terminology. And again, I think a lot of this is personal for Trump. I think a lot of this is personal. But yes, in summation in technical terms, yeah, that's a good way of looking at how this document deals with Europe and what they see. They see Europe as a strategic liability. And again, the Europeans are just they're still in shock. I mean, their jaws are still on the floor. They can't believe this is happening to them. This is what their whole servile routine to Trump, right? Their sycophancy, that strategy of dealing with Trump this time around, has been to prevent this from happening. And despite them rolling over, playing dead, and saying, "Daddy, Daddy," none of that has had any effect, and this has still come out, with all of the contempt and the vitriol and the scorn that Trump is capable of now, as supposedly a U.S. national security strategy. Now, that in the bowels of Langley and the Pentagon and everything, they don't believe and they don't intend to follow, any of this. But again, the chaos bomb the Trump chaos bomb spinning around, is going off on the transatlantic relationship, again, within the U.S. itself, because ultimately this will be a battle again against the deep state, right? In a non-literal, sense, of course.
Yeah.
But I mean, they just will not implement this. They will do everything possible to limit, its implementation. And I'm very interested. I haven't heard personally from Elbridge Colby since this was announced, but he is the intellectual force behind this, right? He penned this. So I'll be interested to see what he thinks. I'd also be very interested to hear Mearsheimer's take on this, because I actually think that Mearsheimer, from a strictly non-emotionally attached, right, realist point of view, would identify this as the best policy for the United States. Again, but I think he would also agree there's very little chance of it actually being implemented. But I'll be interested to hear what Mearsheimer has to say about this.
One last question. I could have swore something was in a document about NATO expansion being part of the destabilization of Europe.
Yeah, he absolutely said that. That was one of the only references. He said that NATO must stop a policy of continual expansion. He didn't say Russia shouldn't expand into Ukraine. There was hedge words there, right? But he says that the expansion, the eternal or the continual expansion of NATO is having a destabilizing effect on Europe, essentially, meaning relations with Russia, essentially, right, is what he's saying there. So that's, again, we know he doesn't like NATO. and I don't think he has the capability to pull out of NATO. But if he did, I'm sure if he did have that capability, I'm sure he would do it. He has as much contempt for NATO as an institution as he does for the European Union.
Okay, I lied. One last question. Russia, everything that I've been reading in Russian media looks at this favorably.
Oh yeah,
Um,
too favorably, but yeah. From Russia's perspective, this is opportunity, right? They see it was identified as a top priority, a top strategic priority to end the conflict in Ukraine as, quote, expeditiously as possible. Russia's like, we can get whatever we want, right? They're desperate, right? And they're dividing with Europe and everything. Russia's going to see this. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to result in a settlement deal because the Europeans and the Kiev is going to sabotage everything. But as far as Russia is concerned, well, now there's their opportunity. It does not appear, at least at the moment, that Trump has any attempt of wading back into this in a serious way. And so if it continues on the battlefield, and they're more confident now about getting everything
their devices
and more out of this. And I have to imagine that from a position of the Kremlin and Beijing, that they're sitting in the theater with their 3D glasses on, and they're like taking them on and off and checking them that they're working right. And then Putin's turning to Xi Jinping and saying, pass the popcorn. This is a great flick. Because they see the U.S. hegemonic beast having identity issues right now, which, again, whether this actually became U.S. foreign policy or not, just the internal conflict and the transatlantic conflict and chaos that will result from this is to their advantage, right? So
interesting. Very interesting. Mark, man, always appreciate you, man. I really do. Great breakdown, as always. Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. You can find Mark on Boosty, Boosty. All of his content is going to be there. All of the interviews that he does are going to be there. He's one of the best people in this field, so definitely check him out. You can also find him on Twitter at Mark Sleboda. Mark, you have a great rest of your day, man. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. All right. Shout out to Mark. I'm going to go from one damn good guest to another damn good guest. The man himself, Carl Jha. I'm always jealous of your shirts, Carl. They're always, I'm awesome. How you doing, man? You doing okay tonight?
I'm doing good. How are you, Jamar?
I am doing all right.
It's good to be here.
Well, thank you, man. It's always good to have you. Carl Jha, he is host of Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Jha. You can find his podcast at Steel Silk with the letter N. And you can also subscribe and support him on patreon.com/Silk and Steel. Carl, you are the person I want to talk to. So I'm glad that you took me up on this offer to join me today. There are so many issues that are taking place right now in Asia. One, Cambodia and Thailand have re-engaged in the military conflict. There's that. There's the national security strategy and China's role in that strategy. There's that. That's super interesting. Mark was just talking about it from the Russian angle. And there's also France and China with Macron and Xi Jinping having this. I think Macron was there for 3 days. And Xi Jinping openly just kind of pointed out, hey, we want you to join this kind of multipolar world. Effectively, we need you to pull away from the United States and work with us more. So let's start with Cambodia and Thailand, since that's the thing that I saw, I guess, last night and this morning. What happened with this? Apparently, one Thai fighter has been killed. One person has been killed. There have been airstrikes going back and forth and artillery strikes from the Cambodian side. How did this restart? I thought Donald Trump had made peace for eternity between these two sides.
Well, people got to understand, both Thailand and Cambodia are ruled by these oligarchic clans that have been entrenched in power for a long time.
I thought they were monarchs. I thought Thailand was a
Well,
monarchy.
it's a constitutional monarchy. I mean,
like
yeah. So the king is symbolic. I mean, okay, the last king had a lot of popular support. The current king is a bit eccentric, let's say.
Is it?
He's yeah, he's fully enjoy his role as a king. I'll just leave it at that. But the people who are actually making the call are the prime ministers, but in Thailand's case, it's really the military. The Thai military has been kind of the power behind the throne. In Cambodia's case, the Hun Sen family has been ruling Cambodia since 1970s, 1980s. Hun Sen used to be a former member of Khmer Rouge, and then he defected to Vietnam when he found out he was going to be purged, and so he came back to Cambodia at the head of a Vietnamese army to unseat Khmer Rouge. And so during that period, he was made the head of Cambodian government. But he remained the head of Cambodian government even after the Vietnamese army withdrew after 1990. So he has been in power for a long time, and recently he just handed over the power to his own son, Humanet. So we're talking about dynasties here, and previously there was a lot of business dealing between the Thai billionaire who was the Thai billionaire who was a former prime minister of Thailand and Hun Sen's family. They were even after the Thaksin, the former Thai prime minister, was ousted by the military. He actually went to he went to Cambodia, became a advisor to Hun Sen, and recently, that at the time when the last Thai Cambodia border clash happened, the Thai prime minister was his sister, his younger sister. I'm sorry, his daughter. So there's this Thai Cambodian thing. It has a long history. The dispute itself has a long history, but why did it become violent? This is the clash. Most recent clash, it was the most violent outbreak. I think it has to do with more internal political dynamics of both countries. In Cambodia's case, there's a leadership transition. The Humanet, as a new leader, he wants to prove his capability as a new leader of Cambodia, that he can stand up for Cambodian sovereignty, territory, etc. And in the case of Thailand, is a little bit murky because, as I said before, there was tension between the office of the prime minister and the Thai military. They had a temporary alliance for a while, but then it was fraying, and the Thai military was not really happy when she made a phone call to Hun Sen, to the Cambodian leader, and call him uncle, and blame everything on the Thai military, and so that thing is still going on, and this whole conflict is totally unnecessary. I mean, both Thailand and Cambodia, they have better things to do, like lifting their people out of poverty, investing in infrastructure. This is a big distraction from all that. But I guess some politicians decided that's what they needed. This is very unfortunate. I hope ASEAN, will come in. Like last time was Prime Minister of Malaysia, who acted as mediator. Which Trump claimed credit. But I do hope ASEAN would step in again and to calm down the waters.
Do you think that there's any, let's say, U.S. influence that is involved in this. I mean, oftentimes alt media looks at this.
Yeah, like out media often attribute everything to U.S. influence. Now, no
Yes.
doubt, U.S. is involving a lot of shady stuff all over the globe, but sometimes it's
A hammer is
U.S.
just
is
a
not
hammer.
this omnipotent being, this all powerful, all seeing being that's dictating everything. There are some that's disregarding the agency of the people on the ground. Particularly the Cambodian leaders and the Thai leader. They have their own reason to engage in
Mhm.
hostility. But it's for the people outside. Sometimes it's easier to project this as some kind of proxy war, or like some U.S. mechanician, than to spend the time to understand the internal dynamics of Thai politics or Cambodian politics, which takes a lot of effort. But I don't see I mean, U.S. is right now trying to have better tie with Cambodia. There is that, because Hu Man-nek graduated from West Point. He was educated in the United States, and for the longest time, U.S. had pursued a very antagonistic policy toward Hun Sen's government in Cambodia, because they saw Hun Sen was getting closer to China. So now they're trying to kind of claw back Cambodia, trying to get Cambodia to pivot toward U.S. So there is that, but then Thailand, which sees itself as a traditional U.S. ally in the region, when they see that, they feel like this is a betrayal, right? I mean, like, they see that as a betrayal. They see that U.S. by not 100% getting their back, and you still try to act neutral. For them, they see this as U.S. is taking the
Betraying them.
Cambodian side. So they actually did.
No.
So the Thai military actually didn't like that. So there's a lot of dynamic going on. But in either country's case, China are deeply involved in both countries. There's a lot of Chinese investment going to both Thailand and Cambodia. I mean, it is possible. I do entertain the possibility that U.S. could be playing a spoiler role. Like, okay, well, we have no interest in to compete with China into the investment in the region to winning economic influence. But hey, if we blow the whole place up, then make it a mess, we can destabilize it and leave it nothing for the Chinese. I mean, that could be a possibility, but I think that's to give the U.S.
Too much power, too much credit.
A lot of the people in charge of a lot of people in the U.S. government are pretty dumb. Okay, there's we like to think of them as evil geniuses, but a lot of them are pretty dumb people. Jeffrey Sachs said that. He said, I know those people. They're pretty stupid. So yeah, I agree.
This is more basically internal agency. These are internal dynamics that is effectively provoking, like, rubbing these two countries in the way that they're dealing with each other, creating friction. Okay, that's fair. I saw this, was like, again. I just thought to myself, again. It's like, and what's wild, I was supposed to be in Cambodia. I would have been in Cambodia right now as this was taking place. And just end up changing my plans at the last minute. Excuse me. The other thing I want to get to is the national security. Well, before I get to that, Japan and China. So Japan is accusing China of flying, I guess, directing radar in their direction and flying hundreds of military flights in their airspace. Now China said this is a lie. Stop provoking us.
No. That's not in their airspace. That's not their airspace. This is international water, but Japan claim it's in their, air self-ways, self-identification, air defense self-identification zone, which is not the thing under international law. This is something like countries, they unilaterally draw, say, okay, this is our air defense self-identification zone, and any any planes flying here, got to report to us, notify us, etc., etc. This is something that started by United States at the beginning of the Cold War in the 1950s. You know, they
Well,
started
Taiwan does
around.
this stuff also.
Yes, that's also, you know, we part of the is started with United States in the 1950s, you know, to contain China. That they U.S. drew the self-identification zone for around Korea, around Japan, around Taiwan. So that's, it has no international standing. The Chinese fleet, they were sailing through the Ryukyu Islands. They threw a gap from Ryukyu Islands on their way to Guam, which you know, United States has considered that the second island chain. And so Japanese quote unquote self-defense force were monitoring, but except from from the Chinese press release, they say they're conducting lawful exercise in the international waters, and the Japanese plane were harassing them, and that's why they did the standard warning to warn off the Japanese fighter planes. And you know, so this is everything so far is pretty standard, kind of the Cold War stuff. You know, we've seen this, you know, during the Cold War, U.S. and Soviet plane, they do interceptions, they shadow each other. Sometimes they drop flares on each other, but this time it's actually pretty serious because the Japanese claim that their F-15 fighters got radar locked by the Chinese fighter jet. I mean, to put it in layman's term, you know, what radar lock means is like if I hold a gun to your head, or, you know, but not pulling the trigger, but if I hold a gun to your head, because once you have a radar lock, you're only one button press away to shoot down that plane.
Yes.
So the Japanese are very upset, and for Chinese, right now the Chinese press release, they didn't claim the radar locks. They just said we did the standard procedure to warn off the Japanese fighter plane that had been harassing our exercise. So I don't know, you know, I that's all the facts that we know. You can choose to believe the Japanese version or the Chinese version, but radar locking is pretty serious. It's like literally holding a gun to your head, but not
like
pulling
if you
the
breathe
trigger.
hard, pull the trigger. That's gonna be your life.
But if the Japanese version is true, you know, that will kind of you know, that actually shows us the capability of the Chinese fighter jet. You know, there's a lot of copium on the internet about Chinese, they got all these copycat Tenmu fighter jet, you know, that will fall out of the air. But if they're able to have a radar lock on the F-15, that means they could shoot it down. That means those are not you know, they're not Tenmu planes. I mean, like the Indian Air Force already found out when they engaged the Pakistani Air Force operating Chinese fighter jets. So this again, I think it shows the capability of the new Chinese aviation.
Yeah, China was very annoyed. They said Japan is smearing them. They said that Japan needs to cut it out. What is the guy named Gao, I believe? He even went so far as to say China will go to war with Japan if Japan keeps this up.
Look,
Trump
man,
has been very quiet.
I don't think the possibility of war is gonna break because the Chinese government is actually the rational actor in this. But if you were up to a Chinese people, if you're gonna put a democratic vote in China today, majority of the Chinese people would vote for war to go to war with Japan, and I guarantee you, and they're much more nationalistic than the Chinese government at this point, at this particular point. So, yeah, I don't think there's going to be a war breaking out, but this also shows that the tension between China and Japan, this is not a temporary phase. This is still ongoing, and it's all got kicked off by the statement of Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi that she would send Japanese military into Taiwan in case of a war breaking out. Citing the justification as that would be an existential threat to Japan, which is totally provocative, unnecessary statement. I mean, she knew what she was doing, though. My theory has still been like Japan is trying to create all these incidents with China to draw United States back in, because this ties into the other thing you want to talk about, the latest published U.S. national security doctrine for 2025, which, if you look at the list of priorities, China just went to the bottom of the priority. They got the homeland, they got homeland, which include migration and
right.
narco trade, whatever. And then the second part is Latin America. They're talking about Venezuela. The third one, they're talking about reindustrialization, secure our supply chain. And China, Indo-Pacific is at the bottom. So I do believe that Japanese leadership, like the Europeans, are panicking a little bit. They feel there might be an American retreat from the Cold War, and they might be the one that got left behind holding the bag. So we have a new reporting from Financial Times, which says there's a Japanese official did confirm that during the phone call Trump to Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, did tell her to chill the F down, did tell her to do not provoke China over Taiwan. So this is so now I also noticed today on Twitter, now there's a lot of big accounts. They're like, oh, Japan is already putting its foot down to standing up China. They're looking for America to back them up. Where is America's support? Right. I think this is a little bit. I think that this seems a coordinated campaign. I see like some big British account tweeting this, some big Zionist account tweeting this. I think this might be some, the standard neocon establishment is trying to resist the new direction the Trump administration is set the roadmap setting for the U.S. priority. They do want to be fully enmeshed in the full-on confrontation with both China and Russia. Fighting the two-front war. But so far it hasn't worked out for the Japanese Prime Minister, and I have a feeling they will be the ones that will bear the brunt of Chinese retaliation, because China hasn't said any, for the people who say, oh, this must be it's just Japan was probably acting as a proxy for United States. Well, yeah, Japan is a client state, but in this case, if you notice the official Chinese reaction, they didn't say anything about United States. It's all on Japan. They're laser focused on Japan right now, and so Japan is gonna have to feel some consequences. Their economy is going to take a hit. Their economy is already imploding, even before this event blowout. And now they're going to face more headwind. Chinese tourists already stopped coming. So I look up the latest data. It turns out the Chinese tourists are actually the largest source of foreign tourists coming to Japan. They even surpassed South Korea year to date. So this is going to take a huge hit to the Japanese economy, which 7% of Japanese GDP is tourism. All that moms and pop shop in Japan that cater to the Chinese tourists, they're going to have to take a hit. And then, not to mention, what other possible economic retaliation China might pursue. China still had the ultimate trump card, which is the rare earth. They haven't even exercised that option against Japan yet, because that's a kill switch. No rare earths, no modern manufacturing. But so China has the cards. They're gonna crank up the pressure as this tension persists. So and Trump already showed that he's not gonna get her back. He's not. It's like, this is your problem. You should sort it out with China. and
He's been very
yeah.
quiet.
So
You know what it puts me in mind of? A
exactly.
marriage. And let's say you were a rapper. You get married to a Russian model that you met online, and she's like, "Buy me a Beamer." Like, that's like the first thing she says, right? That's the first English she learns. Buy me a Beamer. She knows you're rich, and somewhere along the way, you run out of money, like many rappers do, and they're so accustomed to you buying houses, buying Beamers, going out to restaurants and everything else, that the moment that you don't have the money, they don't know how to process what's happening. It's like, no more Beamers? No more Beamers. No more houses? No more houses. I don't know if I want to be in this marriage. Like, meaning Europe, Japan, all of these other countries have become so accustomed to the United States brimming with eternal power. Like this idea that we could do anything. Whatever we want to do, we could do. We can go into China and fight China if we want to. We can fight Russia if we want to. We can fight Iran if we want to. We can do it, all of it at once. This is who America is. And then for them to get a document where he is showing contempt for Europe, just outright contempt, saying you're erasing your culture, then 20 years, Europe is going to be a minority country that we don't know if we can trust because maybe you don't even want to be associated with the United States. Okay, this is like bashing the hell out of Europe in much of this document, right? Europe doesn't know how to process that. It's like, what do you mean you don't want to be in NATO? Or what do you mean you don't want to continuously go after
Did you
Russia?
see Callus reaction? Callus,
Yes.
the foreign, the person in charge of foreign affairs for EU.
Pretty in
She
dumb.
was asked about this, and she's
Yep.
like, "Well, some of it is true." She said some of it is true. She said, but I still think the U.S.-European relationship, this shows the U.S.-European relationship remain a very important one.
She didn't read the document. She didn't read the document. And the same thing with Japan, right? Where Japan is like, what do you mean you're not backing us in this? What do you mean you're not helping us antagonize China? What do you mean you're not doing that? It doesn't seem like they know how to process what seems to be retrenchment by the United States with pushing out these other countries to take on the burden of going after China, going after Russia, going after Iran. They just seem like they can't process it. And so you might be right. I've seen other accounts make the argument.
It's not that they can't. Well, they don't want to process it because they're so comfortable with the old arrangement. Both post-war Europe and post-war Japan, they have became, they got a good deal. They actually, there's some state choose to what Trump is saying about they riding the coattail of American empire. Because of the U.S. security protection, they were able to, grow their economy and they grow rich. Europe was rebuilt, Japan was rebuilt, and both of them are living very comfortably. And now suddenly they're finding out what it's now a multipolar world. There's no longer the unipolar hyperpower, and you don't no longer got our back. What do you mean? No, we want to use your marriage analogy. It's like we want that old marriage arrangement back.
Yeah.
You can't do this to us. Like, I don't care if you don't have money. Take loans. Take loans to buy the Beamer.
It's like we can't go on vacation to whatever rando country. We can't go to the south of France. What do you mean we can't go to the south of France this year? Yeah, they just don't seem to be processing this. And as you point out, like the relationship with China, though, I mean, do you really think that this is? Maybe the question to ask is, do you really think this is going to be implemented in fact? It's one thing to have theory.
That is $1 trillion question. I had this discussion with KJ No and Danny Haifong this morning, actually, on the new national security doctrine. And something interesting KJ No mentioned, he said, this is like coding, right? Like you have the code and then you have the comments. This national security strategy is like the comments on the code. So right now, This just says what they're gonna do, but you don't really know what's actually in the code. How they're actually gonna code it. This is just pseudocode or comments.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's true. I mean, and given Trump administration, the guy could change his mind in like 48 hours in a tweet. Who knows? We're gonna have to see how they follow through. But it does demonstrate a certain shift in the American foreign policy department, because within this document, there's very little talk about ideology. They're no longer talking about alliance of democracy. We're going to face down authoritarianism. It's more a realist approach to the geopolitics today. It's more in line with what Professor John Mearsheimer has always advocated. It's like take a more realist approach. Like, this is why they're putting the economic revitalization and securing our supply chain above China, because they know they can't get to confronting China unless they resolve the rare earth supply chain problem, right? So that's why they're making that a priority now. It's not that they gave up on confronting China. It's just they realize that's not possible in the present circumstances. There's some problems they need to fix. First need to secure this rare earth supply chain first. That's why that is actually number 3 on their priority list. Before China and Indo-Pacific. It's a sequencing problem, right? It's like they're now like it's about strategic sequencing. Now that they need to, they know, okay, we're gonna first focus on Latin America, maybe Africa, and then maybe a little bit reindustrialization for the U.S. military-industrial complex. Then we will be strong enough to confront China.
Yeah, there's a line in the document that Brian Berletic points out. He says, as the United States prioritizes its attention to these threats, European allies must lead from the front. Together, we can establish a division of labor to maximize our comparative advantage in Europe and the Pacific, respectively. Effectively, look, we are overextended. We're $37 trillion in debt. That number is going to go to 40, 50 trillion potentially. We can't afford to keep this up. So we need Philippines, South Korea, Japan, and whoever else is willing to be the new Ukraine, in this situation. We need Europe to be able to take it on the chin, and we will lead from behind. That's what the document seems to be. That's why I disagree with people who are making this argument that the United States is abandoning the world. It's like, dude, no. The document is not abandoning the world. It is trying to find empire on the cheap. At least that's my take on it.
Exactly. It's trying to outsource all the imperial tasks to the vassals now. It's like, okay, you guys have to do some fighting for us. You guys have to do some financing and the fighting, so you can't just enjoy be the good puppy dog of the empire. You actually have to pay for your own upkeeps. And this is what he says. And this is what European and Japanese are resisting. They're like, what do you mean? It's like, we had a good thing going. Why can't we just go back to that?
Yeah. How do you think China is going to receive this?
Well,
I mean, I guess that's the interesting thing, because Russia has been crowing. Like, Russian media has been crowing.
So, I mean, China is not saying much about the United States at this point, because they are also taking a wait and see approach. Confucius says, listen to one's words, but watch one's action. Meantime, they're going to slap down Japan, because Japan decided to volunteer to be slapped down first. So they're going to concentrate on that. And in the meantime, they will still, even though they know Europe is hopeless, they still try to encourage the European leaders to grow a backbone and to pursue strategic autonomy. This explains why they roll out the red carpet for Macron, right? Because Macron visited China before. The last time he was China, he was saying all the good things. was saying all the right thing. He was saying, "Oh, Europe need to pursue strategic autonomy. We can't blindly follow United States." And then he actually got a lot of flack for that from the European media. But then when he left China, everything just resumed as it before. France still followed the suit of Washington's lead, and same thing again this time. This time he had
Yes.
grand welcome in China. Like
Yep.
he was being followed around by all these people greeting him. He looks like he was more popular in China than his own country of France. And Xi Jinping actually made out to meet him, to fly out of Beijing to meet him at in Chengdu. And so they show him a lot of respect, but. While he was in China, he was also saying all the right things. But as soon as he left China, went back to Europe, suddenly he turns around and says, Europe needs to slap sanctions.
Yes, he
China.
attacked China
And
as soon as he
so
left. Yes.
Macron is this type of, snake oil salesman. He just catered to his audience, right? He will have one speech for one set of audience. To the Chinese, he say all the right thing, and then back home to the Europeans, suddenly he says some other stuff. But the problem is we have internet nowadays. Like Chinese, they know what you're saying about them. This is not even behind their back. You're saying this in public, and how can you trust the guys like that? You can't. Macron is one of those like neoliberal establishment boy who just talks a talk but never really walks the walk. He will say whatever to please his present set of his host or audience, but then in the end nothing changed. Nothing changes. And he's already on the last leg of his presidency. He's effectively a lame duck president now. Nothing much is going to change. But China still kind of hold out the possibility. They still hold the door open for engagement with Europe. But I was talking with a French entrepreneur, Arnaud Bertrand, this morning. He says he thinks Macron might be angling for some kind of position in EU, because he's not going to be the French president. He'll soon have to step down. So he might be angling for maybe like von der Leyen's position in EU. So that's why he gotta speak to a different set of audience, to speak all those guys who might get him into a EU presidency and this is why now he's acting tough in China, in Europe. While he's in China, he's speaking a different tune. But standard politician, in other words, you just can't trust these people.
Well, Xi Jinping turned to him at one point and openly, in front of everybody, effectively asked them to be a part of the multipolar world. So this is China leaving the door open, even though skepticism, I would imagine, abounds in this. I mean, yeah, you're right. He turned back and said, China needs to be slapped with tariffs if it's going to, I think he said, it was something about the market or something to that effect. I mean, China has a place in the European market. It's just under pressure. Am I getting that right? And also, this idea that Europe can do without China seems outrageous.
Well, right now, the real problem is the European companies, like a lot of Western companies, are losing their competitive edge against China. Right. China has now moved beyond making toys and shoes. They're moving into advanced manufacturing, which has been the forte of Europe and Japanese. And now China is taking them to, the Chinese company are taking them to cleaners, because these companies just can't compete. They don't, and the problem is they don't sell to the Chinese what Chinese actually want to buy from them. Netherlands actually has the ASML, which makes those extreme ultraviolet EUV lithography machines that can make advanced chips. China would like to buy them, but Netherlands, was complying with sanctions from the United States. Says no, sorry, we can't sell it to you. So then they complain about trade imbalance. This is the same problem with the United States. Trump complains about trade imbalance with China, but then they don't sell what China wants to buy, which is like NVIDIA GPUs. so like
Yeah.
China's like, okay, well, there's so many soybeans we can buy. You know, there's only so many pigs in China that can consume American soybeans. It's like, how are we going to balance this trade if you don't sell us what we want to buy? And so it's a self-inflicted problem. And but that which is a problem they're going to have to face for a while, because I right now, like the Chinese companies are climbing the value chain at a very rapid rate. Now, like China is I think BYD now is the largest exporter of cars. You know, that's they're eclipsing a lot of the Japanese automakers are in trouble. You know, Toyota is still okay, but other brands like Nissan, Mitsubishi, Honda, they're all in trouble because they're seeing their market is getting eroded by the Chinese EVs, which is much more affordable and has more features. And you know,
better cars.
You know, at the end of the day, you gotta offer what people want, what the consumer want, and the Europeans and Japanese are being outcompeted. So instead of trying to work out their own how to make themselves more competitive, they try to, you know, resort to the Trump route, which is, you know, slap with sanctions or tariffs. But China actually would very much like to invest in Europe. But no, with the latest example of Nesperia, when China did invest in a Dutch company, they actually, the Chinese parent company, Wintech, actually plowed billions of dollars to expand the research and development of Nesperia. And then just for the Dutch government to take it away, I mean, it's not going to inspire a lot of confidence for Chinese investment in Europe.
No, it's not.
You know,
not to mention trying to steal the Russian assets. I would imagine doesn't necessarily make China all that comfortable either.
Yeah.
Wow. How do you see, just to close, how do you see the thing with China and Japan working out? I mean, ultimately, as you point out, the Chinese government is more pragmatic, it's more practical. So you don't see this
ultimately, at some point, the Japanese elite have to come to the realization that Japan is in fact an Asian country, and they have to deal with.
They don't know.
Asian neighbors.
They don't know that they're an Asian country.
Well, right now they're hitching their entire fortune with America, right? I mean, because that has been working for them since the war. You know, Japan has seen themselves as, you know, like Asian, but a grade above, right? Like a grade above the rest. At some point, they have to climb down their high horses and just make peace with their neighbors and deal with them as equals. And it might take some time. I don't know if it's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years. I think it might take a generation, just like United States. I say U.S. It's still possible for U.S. to fix all this deep structural problem, but it's going to take more than 5 years or 10 years. It might take a whole generation, you know, to fix all this deep-seated problem that U.S. has. You know, same thing with Japan. They have to come to realization that the post-war order that was constructed by America is fading away. And in large part, it was because America wanted to destroy them, because it no longer works for America. You know, the U.S. no longer want to preserve the post-war order anymore. And they have to learn how to live with the new multipolar world.
Carl, great breakdown on all of these subjects. And we hit everything that we wanted to hit. Cambodia and Thai, national security strategy, France and China. And even added Japan and China. Carl, great breakdown, man. Thank you for this. Carl Jha, host of Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Jha. You can find his podcast on Twitter at Steel Silk In. And you can subscribe and support his podcast on patreon.com/Silk and Steel. Carl does 5,000 years of Chinese history, and it is just a mind-blowing enterprise. Carl, thank you for this, man. Be safe, okay?
Thank you, Jamar.
Bye-bye. Sleep tight. All right. And I see Karen in the background. Karen Kiwatowski. How you doing, Karen? How you doing this morning?
Doing good.
Good. I'm glad that you could join me. Thank you. Yeah, a bit of a... Sometimes when I send a message here, I'm in Kathmandu. Sometimes the message does go through if the Wi-Fi is a little squirrely. It might have been that. I didn't see it until this morning, so thank you for the follow-up on this. Lieutenant Colonel Karen Kiwatowski. She is a retired U.S. Air Force officer whose assignments included duties as Pentagon desk officer, various roles for the National Security Agency. She's author of several books, including African Crisis Response Initiative, Past, Present, and Future, and Expeditionary Air Operations in Africa, Challenges and Solution. I didn't bring you on to talk about Africa today, but there's another interesting thing taking place in Benin. But what I am interested in is your take on these strikes in Venezuela. I am fascinated, to be frank, about the way that the media has been covering this. The media doesn't seem to take issue with the United States using military force against Venezuela for what is a bogus premise of quote unquote drugs. And a changing premise, everything from fentanyl to cocaine, then it's, well, because of Iran, then it's Hezbollah is in Venezuela. Like all of these shifting narratives about why they're effectively trying to overthrow a government. The media doesn't seem to take issue with the murder of over 80 people at this point in boats in the Caribbean, people who don't know who they are. We have to take Trump's word for it, that they are transporting drugs. And even if they were transporting drugs, drugs are not a death sentence. You can board those boats. You can check those boats, but we don't do it. We just kill. What they do take issue with is a double tap. And we found out that the people who were hanging out the side of the boat after the boat was destroyed were waving for help. There's that. They were waving for help or looking for help for like 40 minutes before the double tap came in. And the argument that they made was, well, they could have radioed for help and they were trying to get the cocaine. And so we decided to basically murder them. And so we believe this is a clean murder. We even found out that the boat wasn't even headed towards the United States, which makes this even that much more, deranged. What is the norm with this? I mean, you've been in the military. This seems to be radically abnormal in regards to the way the military operates.
Well, it's not abnormal the way the Israeli military operates, and what we're seeing, I think, increasingly, is the influence of Israeli practices and policies on the way they do business is heavily influencing how we're training and how we're operating. And that includes also in domestic policing, for Israeli contracts for city and even county police and sheriff departments. That's, buying their products, getting Israeli type training. That is not uncommon. That has been increasing over the past 20 years, and especially over the past decade. So this idea that this is how, quote unquote, militaries operate, it is how the Israeli military operates. And increasingly that is influencing how domestic policing in America operates. And of course, our military, our own military. But this in particular, we're not as good at it in the United States military. We're not as practiced at it. And certainly in lying about it and defending it than Israelis are. So then the IDF is. So what you're seeing is accidents of, the traditional military is, no, we're not going to shoot prisoners, but we did. We double tapped. We're shooting people hanging off of boats. That can't be denied. And so our messaging is not as
precise,
mature. Yeah, our messaging is not working as well as it has been in the past for the Israeli military. And that's part of the training that we didn't get from them. So, and of course we wouldn't, because that is racist nationalist state. That's from the design of Israel. Whereas the United States evolution of our military, even though we've had racism and certainly, there's nationalism, but our historical practices have not been this way. And this is what we have a constitution. Israel does not. Our constitution defends the rights of all people, at least on paper. And we go to that as our founding law. So what we've been doing is against the law of the Constitution. It's against case law in the United States, and it's against the military justice system. Military justice system doesn't support this. I want to say one quick thing. When you
Please.
described how the media in this country is not taking action, and you're absolutely right, it has done nothing. It has not questioned any of these false narratives that the Trump administration has been putting out about the different drugs or what these boats are doing, the threat that Venezuela may pose. This is being done under narco-terrorism, which is already a very shaky foundation, but it certainly doesn't apply to Venezuela. And our media, and they say, oh, we don't like Trump. And there's an idea that the media is left-wing and the media does not like Trump. Certainly they enthusiastically supported every legal case against Trump. They complain about Trump constantly. We expect more impeachments in the next, after congressional elections are held. Most likely the Democrats will ascend the majority and they will impeach the president again. And so we can fully expect that they don't like Trump, but oh my goodness, they totally support the war state. They totally support what he's doing with the Navy in the Caribbean. They totally support that. They have no problems with that. They're not questioning that. And that's appalling to me, given what we've seen in the last 20, 25 years of the government lying and the media failing to check it, failing to ask the hard questions. And they're doing the same thing here. So anyway.
They do it after the fact, which is mind-blowing, right? You have the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And then after the fact, they're like, hey, seems like the government lied about that. And then Trump comes up and says, hey, there are drugs in Venezuela. So, we get to murder people en masse and even overthrow the Venezuelan government. And they're like, okay.
Yeah.
Like it's a bit like that blows my mind.
Yeah, they accept it. But, you wanted to, you had sent me emails, or the messages we were going to talk about how the military treats this. And I was thinking about that. And, I used to work years ago in acquisitions. And when we work in acquisitions, there's things that the people in the project offices can and cannot do. And then there's things that contract officers who have warrants, they have contract warrants and their special training and special obligations to follow contract law. And we do take the idea of illegal orders seriously, right? So a contract officer cannot, let's say his boss comes to him and says, you must award this contract. I don't care what the data says, or you have to award this contract this way. That would be an illegal order of a military contract officer. And also any type of, and I remember throughout my career, because I wasn't obviously combat. I worked in the Air Force behind a desk for the most part. Yeah. But if we were, the idea that you cannot obey illegal orders, that is a real idea. Not only is it true and factual, but you do have experience in this if you are ordered to commit a crime. And that would include fraud. Like if you're ordered to sign something that's not true, or to develop a document that's not true to pass on as if it is true. These things are illegal orders. That doesn't really impact human life. Well, it could. I mean, obviously, if you sign off on a weapon system that's dangerous to the people who operate it, obviously that would be risking their lives. But this idea that illegal orders are not to be followed, and we are responsible as individuals in the military wearing the uniform to recognize that. So there's that aspect, which is clear. And these soldiers, people on ships, same thing. In fact, the 5,000 people that live on a carrier battle group, that's a whole town. I mean, it's a whole little city of people. And there are any number of mundane illegal orders that may be given either in mistake or on purpose that must be refused and are refused, but not to the level of, the president's like, you're advocating mutiny. Well, wait a minute, we don't follow illegal orders. The whole system is based on not following illegal orders. So there is that aspect. that is very clear. The Navy's quite familiar with it. They're not shocked at not following illegal orders. They know that.
But it seems that they are. I mean, like Holsley, for example, he resigned. I mean, he got into a fight apparently with Hicksef and was like, I'm not, this seems illegal to me. I'm not doing it. Admiral Bradley seemed to have no issue following an illegal order to murder the people in the boats.
Not talking about generals, because, you know, the generals get chosen specifically for their willingness to, you know, we talk about the general, the flag officer lobotomy, you know, that once a captain or a Army or Air Force colonel is selected for brigadier general or admiral, you know, the people joke that they go to a special place where a lobotomy is conducted, and that is their moral lobotomy, because once they are selected for general, they are expected to stand up for the system and obey any order that they get, you know. And we rarely see, Halsey is an unusual, in the modern experience, exception of someone who publicly, but not with a lot of fanfare, but he publicly stepped down, and he didn't say why, but we kind of understand what it was. You don't see that. A lot of times you see retired officers, and we have plenty of that. I mean, even General Clark, Wesley Clark, who was the ultimate of a kiss-up in terms of doing whatever he was told to do. In fact, he wrote in his memoirs, you remember the raid in Texas of the religious group, right? They burned them all up and all that. The Clinton administration's Attorney General, I forget her name now, she had come to him.
Janet Reno.
Yeah, Janet Reno came to him because he was commanding the military base very close to Waco, and came to him and said, well, we'd like to use tanks. We'd like to use some of these things that you have on this military base. And he wrote in his memoirs that he had told her, legally, ma'am, cannot do it because of posse comitatus. I cannot give you this stuff for policing operation or an FBI operation. Can't do it. But then he told her, here's how you get around it. Here's how you get around it. You say that it's a drug operation. And actually, this has significance with what we're talking about now. You say it's a drug operation and the military can do whatever you want. And so she came back with a different order. And she said that the Branch Davidians were making, not crack, some sort of amphetamine. They were making a drug. They were producing a drug. Now, now think about this. This is a religious organization. It's very religious. Yes, it has some strange things going on, but drugs was the least of it. They had weapons. We knew that. Couldn't do anything about that. That was a domestic issue. Military couldn't get involved. But with drugs, the military could get involved. So immediately after this, if you remember, and you may be too young to remember this was a long time ago, but immediately after that, the news media came up with, oh my God, they got drugs in there too. In addition to everything else they're doing, they've got drugs. An order, Janet Reno created an order. This was a false order. They had no evidence of drugs, but they needed to create this order relating to drugs so that they could access military equipment to go in there and blow up the Branch Davidian compound, which they did, murdering men, women, and children, and disseminated the thing. And immediately after that happened, and they went in and it was all blown up, and then they had to say, oh, well, you know, we were at risk, whatever. All drug information went totally away. There was no more talk of drugs because there was never drugs. And Wesley Clark, he didn't talk about the lying government. What he talked about in his memoir that he wrote after he retired was that he had informed Janet Reno that the only way she could access military stuff if there was a drug charge. And this is all verifiable fact. Okay. People don't think about how the government lies. You have to assume that the government's going to lie to even see it this way, because Wes Clark's writing his memoirs. He's very proud of what he had done. He's reporting what he had done as a military guy. Now, he also came out after he retired, and he did some good service to the counter narrative. You know, he talked about wars for Israel. He talked about the who was influencing our policy, but that was after he retired. Before he retired, he was, yes, sir, 3 bags full, sir. That's what he did, and that's what they all do, except Halsey, obviously, had enough. And he said he's not going to do that. They replace him with a guy who will. But and the narco-terrorism is very important, because that has allowed us to really stretch the law and allow military people to do things that they shouldn't do and they wouldn't normally do. But also the other thing you have to realize is at the front line, at the actual guys that are pulling the trigger and shooting, they don't really care. They have already said, we will kill whoever you tell us to kill. Very few of those guys. This is an all volunteer force. And you remember back in Vietnam with My Lai, right? There was
Yes.
a major flew a helicopter who refused. He was I don't know if he was charged or not charged. He wasn't Lieutenant Cowley, but he said, no, I'm not doing it. There were many refusals of orders in Vietnam, orders to slaughter people, to kill men, women, and children, to burn villages for no reason, to take retribution on the battlefield. There were many orders like that, and there were people that did that, and there were people that also refused those orders and reported them and refused to participate, and basically, in some cases, sacrificed their career or their lives to refuse that. That was a military that was a draft-produced military, okay? These people didn't want to be there. So since they didn't want to be there, and since they were not volunteers, they had no loyalty to that particular political leadership system that commands illegalities, okay?
Right.
But we don't have that kind of military in the United States anymore. It's all volunteer. You've all contracted. We've all committed. When we join, we say, we will do this. You're going to pay me lots of money, give me a good life. I like it. It fits my needs. I volunteered to do it. And then when you refuse an order, it's much harder to refuse order, because they come back to you immediately at any level and say, hey, this was the deal. You signed up for this. You go do it. You think about a couple years ago, we just heard about it in the news a few months ago. I think you know about this. We shot up some Korean, I think it was South Korean, might have been North Korean fishermen.
Yes.
They botched SEAL raid. They did something wrong, and they killed the witnesses on that one too. They killed the witnesses because had they not, this would have been a big issue. This would have been an act of war. Okay, you don't do that. We did it. SEAL teams did it. Mistake, whatever. But they eliminated the witnesses. That's the practice. That's the practice. That's our modern military. And I'm not saying all of them in the military agree with this. They probably don't. Halsey clearly thought it was wrong, and I'm sure many people underneath him think it was wrong. But when you get down to the actual guys pulling the trigger,
they'll do it.
Some of they're under stress. They're in a functional military unit where you give a command, it's followed. I mean, we do training for a reason, right? We don't want you thinking about the command. We want you following that command. But again, we have had a number of abuses that we have punished people for. And I think of the prison in Iraq where we were doing things. We held some of those folks. Of course, who did we not hold accountable for that? Who did we not? The flag officers, right? We don't hold the people that are actually responsible for it. But anyway, they know they're breaking the law. We have plenty of training in refusing and properly reacting to illegal orders. Okay, we have plenty of experience in that. And also, we don't study international law very much. Even I knew nothing about international law. I should have probably known more about it. But everybody in the military understands the Nuremberg trials, right? And everybody in the military understands that following orders is no excuse. They all know that.
No, that's only if you lose. That's only if you lose. That's only if you lose. Right?
We think about it. That's true. But you know what? And I think your previous guest was talking about it. The world's changing. We're not the number one. We are losing already. Last war we won was we helped win World War II. We helped. We didn't win it by ourselves. We helped. We assisted. And that's the last one we've won. So world's changing. And this idea that you don't follow illegal orders, we know this. And terrible abuses are happening. But it starts at the top. And when we say narco-terrorism, we're getting ready to break the law in the military.
Yeah. It's their fig leaf to effectively illegality. Will there be consequences? I mean, there have been people who have been calling for Hegseth's head on this. Now, Hegseth has effectively tried to distance himself, effectively saying, hey, I back Admiral Bradley. He has my full support. I didn't tell him to do it. It wasn't on me. I didn't tell him to do that.
And Hegseth doesn't understand because he's young and he didn't spend a full career in the military. He's an operator. Hegseth's an operator. So he doesn't really have the gravitas or the life history, life experience to understand that at the top of the Pentagon, or whether you're a general or a civilian leader, you have to take that, right? That's your responsibility. And maybe it's a generational thing, but we see this with other armies. In the Ukraine army, the guys at the top who have poorly led the Ukraine army into disaster, they stand up and take responsibility. They say, hey, they own it. Yeah, not the politicians, but the military guys, even when they're losing badly, even when they've made terrible mistakes, they eventually say they own it. And Hegseth is reacting to the reality, which he's in big trouble. And instead of saying I own it, because he doesn't, he doesn't have the experience and the knowledge to really fully accept that. And plus, working for Trump, anybody gets thrown under the bus with Trump. This whole administration is not one that inspires gravitas. It's not one that inspires people to really take full responsibility for their actions, because he picks people not for necessarily their qualifications, but their loyalty to him. And that's a very different dynamic. So Hegseth is doing exactly what we might expect him to do. And I don't think it's good. It's not to his credit, but I understand why he is trying to distance himself. He's not he's not running the Pentagon for the good of America. He's running the Pentagon for Trump. And Trump is he could say you're fired at any moment. We know what Trump is. We're pretty familiar with Trump over the past 20 years. Yeah. But he knows there's illegalities. Yep. And heads should roll. And initially, before heads roll, what we need is we need a complete stoppage. When in the Air Force, when an airplane breaks a couple times for the same reason, or you have the same little bolt has been defective, we do a stand down. Navy does the same thing on their ships. Army does the same thing. Stand down. In fact, the Army will do stand downs for things like, rapes or serious crimes, criminal acts in a certain base, when things are getting out of hand, stand down, and everybody meets and they reassess, their strategies. And if it's an educational thing, everybody goes through training for whatever it is, I'm sure businesses do the same thing, right? If there's a problem, you got to have a head come to Jesus meeting, and we got to figure out what this problem is and solve it. That's what needs to happen in the U.S. Navy at a minimum. At the U.S. Navy, they need to stand down. They need to talk about what the rules of engagement are, because we know from experience that the people who will be punished are the guys at the bottom of the chain. Okay, and the guys that pulled the trigger, they're going to be punished, just like the ones in the prisons in Iraq where they mistreated people. Even some of the people who tortured folks at Guantanamo, the top people were never punished, right? We don't see that. So to protect our people, to protect our military, that's the very least they should do immediately, is stand down, examine their premises, examine their training, figure out what the law actually says, because I think we know what it says. If they double tapped and came back 40 minutes later, they hadn't drowned yet, so we killed them. This is Israeli tactics. This is right out of 1967, the attack on the USS Liberty, right, where they 4 hours strafed that plane and strafed the boat, planes and speedboats, all attacking and shooting people in the water. This is what we see in there's stories of this in the World War II, where survivors of submarine attacks and ship sinkings were strafed in the water. These are bad memories. This is against the rule of war. So we know it's wrong, and yet we're doing it. And there's no stand down. And the guy at the top saying, "Oh, I didn't have anything to do with it." And the president, what has the president said? What has he said? What has Trump said? Very little. And he doesn't know much, but he sees it probably as how do I control this narrative, or how do I just tamp down control so we can keep doing what I want to do? And of course, what he wants to do at another whole level in invading Venezuela, or conducting an open coup of the elected leadership in Venezuela. They say, "Oh, Maduro is not the elected leader." Well, actually, yes. The whole world looks at the process by which he was elected multiple times, and they say it bears scrutiny. It is okay. It's probably better than what we had in 2016 and 2020 in terms of how elections were operated. So, we got a big problem. Part of it's at the very top, and part of it is we're ruining our Navy.
Do you think
when a military behaves this way, it's so un-American in our American myth of who we are. It's so counter to that. that this has long-term harm, not just to the people committing the crimes and the leaders that are tolerating it and the politicians that are demanding it. This has long-term damage to our whole military, our whole sense of faith in our government.
Yeah. What do you say to the people who say that this is no different than Obama's kill list? That the only difference between the two is that you could see it, as opposed to the kill list is intellectual.
Oh, well, it's not much difference, because presidents are murdering people, past presidents, all the way back to, we can go back as far as you want. They have selected people and they've murdered them, sometimes secretly. Obama's murders were not secret. We had plenty of publication that particularly the American citizen that was killed, and then his son later, who was also an American citizen, was also killed, and his son was like a teenager. So clearly, yes. But we knew those names. Those names were reported in the media, and then some sort of false justification was made for that. In the case that Trump's doing, it is a natural extension of presidential murder on demand, but he has no idea who he's killing. He has no idea who he's killing. This is worse than we're bombing a wedding because somebody in that wedding is guilty, and we'll kill 100 other people to get that one guy. That is actually, that's right out of the Israeli playbook. That's exactly how the Israeli military targets. This is, and it's very open about it. I mean, it's no secret. Israeli government, the IDF operates this way. This is their tactics and strategy. But we're not Israel. Washington, D.C. might be, but the rest of the country is not Israel. So this is very concerning and alarming to most Americans. But yeah, Trump has no idea who he's killing. In fact, that's probably why they're trying to kill the witnesses, because, you know, it was very embarrassing when we had some survivors last month who came up and they said, well, who are you? And he said, well, I'm not even Venezuelan. And the other guy said, well, I was fishing. And the other guy said, yeah, I was running some pot, but it wasn't going to the U.S. Right. I mean, this is they can't, that ruins the superficial veneer of righteousness that I think the Trump administration wants. So I think they've shifted to basically full-blown IDF tactic.
Kill them all. Kill the witnesses. Kill everybody. We don't want anybody to be able to.
If 100 people die because you got one guy that you wanted, even if you don't know his name, but he is a categorical person. This guy, the ship guy, the boat guy, the speedboat operator, we're gonna get him. And then the 100 other people, we don't know any of them. We can't identify them. And of course, the other problem, legal problem, and I think Judge Napolitano has made this point, so have many others in Washington, is that these people are, the Constitution guarantees the right of the accused. The Constitution does not guarantee the right of the accused if they are born in America, they are American citizen. That's not what it says. The rights of the accused are protected, and we have historically and rightfully applies. It goes to everyone everywhere. And the other thing that's really sick about this is the U.S. Navy. Well, I could be wrong. I'm assuming that the carrier battle group has the capability to arrest these guys.
Yes, I keep making that point.
I'm assuming that the Coast Guard does this all the time. You know, the Coast Guard stops vehicles, and sometimes they have to chase, and sometimes they fire shots over the bow, so to speak. But the Navy, not the Coast Guard, the Navy's doing this. The U.S. Navy is treating this as targets. They are targeting these boats. They are blowing them up, killing the people that they can, and then going back and killing the survivors. And we have no dogma. We have no policy that allows this. We have and maybe what's terrible about this is that our U.S. Navy does not have the capability to stop speedboats, right? And so we have to immediately resort to blowing them out of the water. And you know what? If that's the case, then we're going to lose a carrier soon, either to China or anywhere else.
I mean, that blows my mind if that's true.
Well,
how could we not have the capability of stopping speedboats?
I'll tell you what, if you think back just recently to why we stopped the operation in the Red Sea, Trump stopped that operation after it ran for a while.
Right.
We were losing quite a lot of expensive equipment, but I think why he stopped it in part was not just the loss of expensive drones and Predator drones and things like that. It was because they were approaching too close to our ships. We had, because what the Yemenis Navy, or not, I shouldn't say the Yemenis, the
Ansarallah.
Yeah, the guys, they're Yemen, but they're not the Yemenis government. But anyway, they were very effective, and they were getting closer and closer to our ships with small boats and drones, sea drone type things. So the risk, he didn't do it because we were losing a lot of money, because that money goes right back into the military industrial complex to replace the lost equipment, right? But he was doing it because the risk was too high for our actual ships, and that would be a huge embarrassment, right? If the Yemen had been able to do that. So he stopped that operation, and it may be that our Navy is incapable of dealing with small seaborne or low altitude airborne threats to our ships, that we don't have our warning and reaction is not good enough. And of course, our warning and reaction to that kind of threat is to blow it out of the water. So maybe the Red Sea doctrine that did not work, it's not a doctrine, but what we did in the Red Sea had to be stopped, right? Before it got out of hand and we lost too much. Maybe that's Navy doctrine. We see a small boat in the area, we take it out. Instead of doing what legal navies should do in open waters, in international waters. So there's a lot of causes for concern here. I'm concerned about how the Navy is evolving, because this direction is, in both legal terms and operational terms, extremely dangerous in the near term, but it also may be telling us something about the capabilities of our military. You know, Americans think our military is so powerful. And many people around the world, and objective people in America, are looking at it and they go, you know what? We can't defend anything. Our systems don't really operate except under optimal war planned out type conditions. Okay. And we're not, and our Navy in particular is incapable of doing what we've told them to do in the Caribbean, except one way. And that one way happens to be illegal under American law and under international law. But our choice is either we do it this way or we can't stop these little tiny boats that aren't even armed for the most part. Now, there may be some people on those boats, if they're actually running something, they probably have weapons of some sort. But can you imagine, a couple of rifles or even a machine gun against an entire Navy? That ought to be something they can overcome without killing all the people sinking the boat and killing the witnesses, right?
The Coast Guard does it every day. I mean, the Coast Guard does it every day. I mean, in fact, the Coast Guard put out a document where I think they say they stopped, like, let's say 200 boats. And I think there was like 40 had nothing on the boats. Meaning the Coast Guard also has to deal with people with potential arms.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like the notion that the U.S. military, that the Navy can't necessarily deal with something that a police operation can do seems to be outrageous.
And if nothing else, if President Trump and Hegseth really thought, okay, we're going to do this thing, and it may or may not lead up to a war or an invasion in Venezuela, which is what they're talking about. I mean, most people are expecting this to be the case.
Yes.
At the very least, could they not work with the Coast Guard for the functions that the Coast Guard is trained and capable of doing? And of course, we think of the Coast Guard, U.S. Coast Guard, well, that's around the coast. Well, it's around the coast. It's around every single waterway that they can identify in the United States, up the rivers and the lakes and everything. Coast Guard's everywhere. And it is also in the Black Sea. It's in the Caribbean. It's in the Pacific. The Coast Guard, the U.S. Coast Guard goes everywhere, and it operates in every ocean, high oceans, usually littoral, usually the coastline is what their specialty is, but they are all over. So there's nothing in the world stopping this whole operation to stop drug runners from Venezuela from being conducted entirely by the U.S. Coast Guard. And yet, and during a time of war, let's say narco-terrorism somehow is a war excuse, because they're certainly using it as a justification for war. They've done it before and they're doing it now. The Coast Guard during times of war becomes part of the Department of Defense or the Department of War, right?
Interesting.
The Coast Guard becomes a defensive part of a war effort when war is declared. Of course, we don't declare war, but I'm sure that they could use the Coast Guard in any case. It would require less, manipulation of the language to have the Coast Guard involved in that kind of thing. And of course, the real problem is if the Coast Guard did go there and intercepted safely the boats, arrested the people, okay, what would we find out? Well, there's no narco terror.
That there's no drugs.
That's what we would find out if the Coast Guard did it. So this actually is far more sinister than a simple mistake or well, the president wants to do something, and so all the civilians and the generals struggle. You know, they all run to try to make the president happy. It's more sinister than that. The government itself knows good and well that we don't have a narco terror threat from Venezuela. Our own government knows this very well, and yet the president, the administration, the generals, the admirals, all the way down, probably down to the colonels, but not the lieutenant colonels and the majors. They're usually the ones that say, wait a minute, this is idiotic. But the top level of the military and top level of our civilian leadership, they have all said, this is a lie, and we're going to present it as the truth because we want something. And what we want is to either control Venezuela, put our own friendly government in Venezuela, or we simply want to make the point, as Trump has done with his national security strategy, which came out, I guess, this past week or so, that the United States owns the Western Hemisphere, that the Monroe Doctrine has a new Trump corollary, which says we'll do whatever we damn well please in the Western Hemisphere as we pull away from maybe some other places. So everything they're doing in Venezuela is a test case here, and it is being done on false pretenses. And the media, like you said at the beginning, is asking no questions. They're afraid to, really. And I have to mention, Judge Napolitano went on, you know, he used to work at Fox, right?
Yes.
And he was fired from Fox after many, many years of being one of their most popular.
I didn't know he was fired. I thought he just left.
Never,
Wow.
They won't ever leave. He was fired just like Tucker Carlson was fired. They're all fired when they step on the narrative, and Trump and Napolitano was beginning to do that. And once he was fired, of course, he does his own show, he does his own thing, and he's still a constitutional lawyer. He does writes his articles.
It's a fantastic show, by the way.
Right, but he was asked back onto Fox, his old network, just this past, let's see, maybe it was Monday. Maybe it was the weekend, I'm not sure. And he had it's gone quasi-viral, his interview. And his interview was on this very topic of what's going on in Venezuela. And of course, the unconstitutionality of it. And he starts off his little 4-minute segment with, you know, he worked with Pete Hegseth for 8 or 10 years and was friends with him. But then he launches into what Hegseth's Department of...
Wait, Napolitano. Oh, that's right, because Hegseth is a TV person. That's
yes,
right.
That's
That's
Hegseth.
right.
I mean, where'd they get Hegseth? He came right off of Fox
That's
News.
right.
So
He was on Fox.
Yeah, exactly. But Napolitano is not a frequent guest back to that news agency, even though it's quasi. You'd say, oh, Fox News is conservative. Well, not really. They're just as warmongering.
Yeah.
Yeah. and they also toe the line very well to whatever the administration wants.
Exactly.
So, but he was back on, and they brought him on for his expertise in constitutional law, because I think that's the most daring thing that they're willing to do. None of their reporters can ask a question. Oh, I know. Let's bring back Napolitano. We fired him already. So that'll kind of reduce his credibility. But yeah, let's see what he has to say. And he slammed it, and it's going all over what he said, because he was, of course, very straightforward. He knows what he's talking about. And he critiqued this operation from a legal sense, and it is illegal. Okay, that's well known. And all the media could do was maybe, well, let's pick a guy. We'll see what he has to say, right? We can't ask the questions because the media is owned by the government. And that means either one. I don't care whether it's a Democrat government, Republican government, Democratic Congress, Republican, it doesn't matter. The media is owned by them. Whatever they need, they get from the media. But by bringing back the judge and also some of the other voices of law and order, and I really am curious to what Admiral Halsey will eventually come out with, especially if he watches it.
Interested in his take.
If you love the Navy, clearly Halsey wouldn't be a 4-star admiral if he didn't love the Navy, right? You don't stay in it entirely for money or status. You love the sea, you love your people, whatever. So if anybody who loves the Navy as an institution is got to be appalled by this, because we are watching it be destroyed by our own politicians. Now the Army, I think, was already trashed, and the Air Force is a willing, prostitute to whatever, to whatever it really is to whatever the state wants, because we have a lot of very expensive weapons. If you think about, the Air Force owns two legs of the nuclear triad, right? We have the atomic stuff, and then the long range bombers. This is both part of the Air Force. So the Air Force gets a huge amount of money with very little accountability going into these very expensive systems. So the Air Force is a prostitute for money. I don't know what it stands for. We could have had an Army Air Corps, and it would probably be better than the Air Force. And there are people, not me particularly, but there are many people that wish the Air Force didn't exist, because it actually does not defend. It does a lot of things, but it doesn't really defend our country. And the Army has had a long time. We know about the Army's problems. They've been problems forever and ever in Army leadership. But the Navy has kind of been above some of this. There's been a few bad publicity eras for the U.S. Navy, but they've done better reputationally, I think, than have the other two services. And right now they're getting destroyed. Now I will say there's a small segment of Americans that say shoot them all, kill them in the water. But this is a reflection of the kind of Israeli and IDF kind of Christian conservatism, Zionism that basically puts American life, Israeli life above all other life. And that is anti-American. Of course, it's not the American tradition. So it is a minority view. But for the most part, I think we're witnessing something terrible, not just for the poor 80 people, and it'll go up. The numbers will continue to go up unless they stay out of the water. I mean, Trump has conducted an embargo by murder here. Yes. So, but the whole thing's wrong on many, many levels. And I think it won't be long. We won't need 5 years to look back on this to see what it was. I think we're going to know we're going to understand precisely exactly what this has been, probably in the next few months.
Karen, fantastic breakdown. Really good breakdown. Thank you for this. It's deranged. Your breakdown is fantastic. Honestly, I really appreciate it. Lieutenant Colonel, or retired Lieutenant Colonel Karen Kiwatowski. She is a retired U.S. Air Force officer whose assignments included duties at the Pentagon desk officer in various roles for the National Security Agency. She's author of several books, including African Crisis Response Initiative, Past, Present, and Future, and Expeditionary Air Operations in Africa, Challenges and Solutions. Karen, you have a great rest of your day, okay? Thank you for this.
You too. Thank you, Jamal. Thank you.
Bye-bye. All right, we have come to the end. Shout out to Karen. She gave a really good breakdown for this. I really appreciate her for giving me. I was curious about somebody who's in the military and their take on it. Colonel Wilkerson is going to be on the show tomorrow, so I would imagine he's going to have some feelings about this himself, in addition to other issues. But great breakdown. In fact, really good show. Mark Karlshaw, Karen Kiwatowski. I can nail that name now, so I'm pretty proud of myself. Great breakdown. It's a deranged policy. I mean, the idea you're murdering people who are not even coming to the U.S., meaning it's bad enough you're murdering all of these people, but the entire premise that you were using to effectively murder the people breaks down the moment that you find out, it's not even coming towards us. It's just outrageous. Let's go to chat before we leave. When are you getting Casey Malone back? She is great. I hadn't thought about it, to be honest. Casey came on about Christian Zionism, if I'm not mistaken. She had a really good spot on the show, but I have a tendency to compartmentalize people into boxes in regards to what let's say their subject matter versus whatever the narrative or the stories that we're covering at any particular time. If it was a story in Christian Zionism, I probably would think of her and look her up. So it's just contextual. That's all. There's nothing to say about her. She's awesome. Let's see. Auntie Ann signing on late during Karen's interview. Spot on as always. Going to watch the beginning. Thanks, Jamal. It was a good show, Auntie Ann. It was a damn good show. It was a really good show. There are days, but today was actually a really good show. Carl, Mark, and Karen, all of them were on point. All of them did a damn good job in explaining the various subjects that we covered today. Tomorrow is also going to be a damn good show. Jerry Gray is going to be on first thing in the morning. We are going to have Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. He's going to be on at the end. And David Houdain, I think that's right, is going to be on midday to talk about Benin and what took place in regards to that. Carl Shaw and Denise Talman. Really? Did he? That should be interesting. Yeah, Jerry Gray is going to give a take on China and whether or not, because, Jerry Gray lives in China. He lives in Beijing. I will be curious about what China is saying in their media about the national security strategy. So we'll see. We'll see. We will see. Guliano, he's on the ground in Caracas now. Is he? I will hit him up. I had him on the show once before, but his lighting and everything was just fucked. Last time I had him on the show, he got like 2 views. But I'll check him out. I'll hit him up and see whether or not he'll talk to me about what's taking place on the ground in Venezuela. I do know they have been arming a large number of personnel, a large number of people into the Venezuelan military. It seems like Maduro is going to defend his country, and God bless him. Kill the enemy, especially enemies that are breaching your gates. I should read February 20th, 2026 will be the 100th anniversary since Carter G. Woodson, Miseducation of the Negro. That was one of the first books I think I read. I used to be, when I was in high school, I was heavy into that, let's say, sector of education of Black thought and Black writings and stuff like that. And Miseducation of the Negro was one of those first few books that just drew me into thing. There's a line in that book. God, it's been so long since I've read the book. There's a line in that book that I never forgot. If you show a man the back door long enough, the man becomes to accept the back door. And when the back door is removed from him, the man looks for the back door. Like basically, if you make secondary conditions normal and you instill it over a period of time, that when you remove those secondary conditions, even if first world conditions are available, they will seek out those secondary conditions. That is, yeah. But right here, 100th anniversary since the first Negro History Week was created by Carter G. Woodson and spread across the country in partnership with Black institutions and African American. Shout out. Yeah. Kurt Boss. I miss live chats a lot, but when I get on, they're great. Sorry, Jamal, it's hard to be happy. Why is it hard to be happy? Why is it hard to be happy? Look, I get it. The world is fucked. I get it. The world is fucked. But does you being happy or unhappy change the fact that the world is fucked? It doesn't. Somebody who is being murdered, starved, killed, beat, etc. You being happy or unhappy doesn't change any of those things. Action changes those things. Concerted effort changes those things over time, I suppose. But you being depressed and miserable does not. So, look, and I feel you, man. I get in my moods myself, so I do get it. But yeah, trying to deny African heritage, yes, and claiming to be indigenous Americans. Okay, I don't get that. I don't understand that one. Western culture is fucked. Agreed. We agree I can't get motivated enough to want life to exist in a spiritual state. What if you were living during slave times, for example, and you were a slave, and somebody said, look, at some point, slavery is not going to persist. And you may say, well, dude, this institution is not going anywhere. Everything feels permanent in the moment just because our span of existence is so short over the course of the span of time. But the amount of time that humanity has existed on this planet is like, if you spread it out on Earth, it's like you would barely see the blip that humanity exists. Change is constant. And you can take a perspective that I do, that we're living in prehistory, that that at some point there has to be a jump to something else. Otherwise, we won't exist. We can't persist in this way in perpetual state. It's one thing if you're fighting the Second World War, right? And it seems that the world is coming to an end. But there are no weapons that are deployed on either side that can effectively end the world. That's not really where we are right now. A fuck up can end all of this. There's no way where we can persist in maintaining this level of fuckery. At least I don't think so. Either humanity on some level changes, or all the shit ends. Maybe we have a Blade Runner existence where we just kind of limp along into the a pathetic morass, into the future, etc. Maybe we end up like The Expanse, where we end up in a galaxy and we're hurling rocks at Earth. Something that's worse than a nuclear bomb, by the way. Maybe. But maybe this is also prehistory. And there's some evolutionary leap that takes place. I don't know. You can't see around corners. I will tell you, I remember a doctor told me one day, he says, look, if you think at 19 that everything, you've encountered everything, that this is the best that your world is ever going to get, and this is the best that things are, then fair enough. You can jump off a bridge. He didn't say jump off a bridge, but I'm using it to be hyperbolic. Look, we can't see around corners. Can't see around corners. So I get it. And like I said, I do get into those boots myself, kind of like in 3 Body, where you tell the aliens, come get us. We can't deal with our own affairs. But if you remember in that, she regretted that choice at the end of that book. So, all right. I want to thank Auntie Anne and Laugh 66. Shout out to both of you. As I always tell you, you guys and your support for this channel is the thing that makes this channel possible. You have my absolute thanks for it. You can support this content, PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, buy me a coffee. All of these things helps the content. All of these things helps the show keep ticking along. It is my immense desire to hire a producer. I'm not at a position yet on this channel that can effectively afford a producer. But when I get to that point, I would like to hire one. For that, the show needs to grow and continue to grow. Like the content, share the content. I will cut these videos, and well, that's assuming if you missed anything. I guess you can see it in the post after the fact when the videos are cut. But you guys have my thanks for being here. And I think that's it. I'm going to say like, share, subscribe. You can support this content, PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, buy me a coffee, super sticker, memberships. Those are something else that also helps. And I will see you guys bright and early tomorrow morning. Be safe and be kind to the degree that you can be kind. Have a good one.